afternoon. How are we doing? Good, wonderful, wonderful. To all of you, of course, in the room today and those of you joining us online, a very warm welcome to the UBS Center Forum 2024 edition. This is the place where I would encourage you to put your hands together. There we go. Let's bring up the energy in the room just a little bit. My name is Montero, as you've seen on various screens already. I am honored to be your guide today and to spend this next couple of hours with you looking at the hype surrounding AI and getting over that a little bit by focusing on what's really happening. So, how is AI promoting economic growth and who will benefit most from it? Does AI have the potential to really increase prosperity and lower inequalities? What are the long-term economic implications of AI-driven automation and much, much more, especially when it comes to the global labor markets? Now, all of these questions we're going to be diving into, as we said, over the course of the forum, with the help of a very esteemed group of experts who are coming from academia, research, economy, and business. But we are also hoping to hear from all of you, and we're going to tell you about that in just a moment. If we look briefly at the agenda, you'll see that the event is broken down into basically two parts, right? The first part, we're going to be looking at AI's role in the economy. We're going to have a coffee break. And then we're going to be looking at AI's role in the labor market. Now, in both of these halves, we're going to be highlighting a keynote speaker, and then we're going to be having a panel discussion following that. And that will be the same for the second half. And then we're going to be officially ending the evening with the research slam that's going to be happening outside in the foyer and an apero for everyone that registered. All right, so lots to look forward to. As I mentioned earlier, this is meant to be an interactive discussion. So this means that we want to hear from all of you. How many of you have used Mentimeter? Okay, all right, so for some of you, sorry, I'm just going to go through it quickly. For those of you that have not used Mentimeter, it's very easy. You just have to scan the QR codes that you see on the various screens. There we go. Good job. Very well. Okay, and then you're going to put in that code, and that will take you directly to our Mentimeter site. This is the same for all of you watching us online as well. So then feel free to put in your questions, which we will be addressing at the end of both panels. We'll reserve some time to make sure that we hear from all of you and address your questions. And we're also going to be using them to do a couple of poll questions with all of you. So we expect participation. Make sure that you scan that QR code so that you can be part of the polls, the Q&As. And lastly, if you are not comfortable with Mentimeter or just prefer to use a microphone during the Q&A sessions, we have those too. So just feel free to raise your hand and someone will come with a microphone. Okay, one of the last bits, unfortunately in this room, given that it's a bit below ground, we have poor internet reception. Okay, I think some of you have already figured that out. Well, if you've gone onto Wi-Fi, you will also have seen that Carium Auditorium also has its own Wi-Fi. So go ahead and click on that one. It's super easy. There's no registration. You don't have to fill anything out. Just click. It works. And that way you'll be connected and can participate. Are we good? Okay, perfect. And lastly, you are welcome, of course, to use social media. If you post or you want to share, you want to take photos, whatever the case may be, feel absolutely free. We also just invite you to use the hashtag #EconomicsForSociety. All right, so now that I have all of that out of the way, thank you for your patience. Let's get started. Our first keynote speaker today is a professor at MIT, but to simply call him an academic would be an understatement. A pioneer at the intersection of behavioral economics, machine learning, and public policy, his research has influenced everything from how we design healthcare systems to how we address poverty, and even how we tackle climate change. A MacArthur Genius Fellow and co-author of the influential book Scarcity, he holds the first joint appointment between the MIT Economics and computer science departments, where he is the Peter de Flores Professor. Today, he's going to help us kick off the forum by challenging us. He's going to challenge us to rethink our assumptions and explore innovative solutions to some of society's toughest problems. Please help me give a warm, warm welcome to Sendhil Mullainathan.
All right, let's dive in. I don't love that you guys are cloaked in darkness, but it is what it is. I'm going to pace a lot, so don't worry. I've only fallen off the stage once, and it's not a very high stage. So let me just dive in. About a year and a half ago, I went to a conference that had a fantastic title. It was called Transformative AI, the Economics of Transformative AI. What is transformative AI? The conference posed a provocative question. What if we succeed? What did they mean? They meant transformative AI is the incredibly ambitious goal that if we can build algorithms that can do what people can, completely do what a person can do. What if we could succeed at that? Just imagine, take a doctor. Doctors read EKGs, MRIs, X-rays. Imagine an algorithm that could do all of that. Imagine an algorithm that could do call center work, an algorithm that can handle meeting scheduling. A friend of mine had this story once where she was communicating with a famous, author, and the author put her off to the assistant to find a time to meet, and she was very friendly to the assistant, being really, really friendly. And she finally got on the phone call with the author. And it turned out the assistant was just an AI, and she had just wasted all this time being incredibly friendly to some bot. But imagine that could happen. Imagine data analysis. Someone who goes through and does all the data. Maybe you could just ask a question and all the data analysis. Imagine coding. What if we succeed? So the question that was being posed at this conference is, here we are in 2024. Flash forward a little bit, and we end up with the future where algorithms can do what people can. What will be the future of work? What will be the future of society? Let's dream, and let's dream big, and let's look to the future. That's what the conference was about. What I want to do a little bit is to do something different right now. I want to look back. I want to look back to 1970. Come on, that was impressive. That took me at least an hour. Should we do that again? All right, that's fine. I see you guys are not impressed. I want to look back to 1973. In 1973, March, Scientific American, a month before I was born, had a very interesting article. The article was about animal locomotion, okay? It's about how efficient are animals at moving around. How many kilocalories per kilometer to move a kilogram of mass? You're probably impressed that Americans know what these things are. I am too. I think maybe it's because it's a scientific magazine. And what they did is they put a figure in that magazine. It was a figure that graphed by mass of animal, body weight, efficiency on the y-axis. Now you'll notice some things that are interesting here. It turns out that mice are not very efficient at all. Those little critters, they annoy us, but they're not very good at getting around. People, somewhat efficient, somewhere in the middle. Salmon, very efficient. Now, what made this figure interesting, the rest of the talk is me going through data point by data point, so just settle in, people. You're going to hear about glowflies in a second. No, that's not the rest of the talk. What made this figure interesting is a point on this figure that is an outlier, a point that is not, properly speaking, an animal. If you look closely at it, you could see it. The most efficient thing on this chart is man on bicycle. It's kind of amazing that people are not very efficient, but people riding bicycles are very efficient. The reason I'm showing this figure is that this figure, though it's about animal locomotion, has gone on to enter the folklore of computer science. It's entered the folklore of computer science because a very famous technologist looked at this figure and said, this is what computing should be. It should be building bicycles for the mind. I would tell you who that person is, but then I'd have to say Steve Jobs, and then you'd say, oh, he's just quoting Steve Jobs. But in fact, it was Steve Jobs who made this, I think, quite brilliant observation. Computers should be bicycles for the mind. Why am I telling you this? We have such two different views of computing you've now heard. In one view, we've said, imagine an algorithm that can do what people can. Automation. The other view that said, imagine computers as bicycles that let our minds go to places we couldn't imagine. Take us places. Do things with it. This talk works much better in the Netherlands, but whatever, we'll just keep pushing forward. These views are fundamentally different, and I want you to reflect on these two views. To do that, I'm going to take a very concrete problem and walk you through. So, there is something called sudden cardiac death. Sudden cardiac death is something that happens disproportionately to men, and they just sort of keel over one day, dead. Sort of electrical problems with the heart, suddenly they die. Now, it would be really useful to find out to whom this is going to happen, because we can install a pacemaker and save lives. Well, we have a way of looking at the electrical functioning of the heart. This is an EKG. It produces, you put leads on places like that. Many of you have probably had an EKG. If you haven't, maybe you should go get one. Or you're just very young. But this is what an EKG produces, waveforms of the heart. So the question is, can we use an algorithm to address this problem of sudden cardiac death? Can we look at the EKG and understand, who's at risk? How would you do it? Well, you would take a large data set of EKGs, you would build, this is a convolutional network, you would build an algorithm, a deep learning algorithm, that would process this data. And in the world where we're automating, it's clear how we would process it. This data would come with a bunch of labels that says, in this EKG, this is what the doctor sees, in this EKG, this is what the doctor sees, and you would train this algorithm to automate clinical judgment. The good news, by one measure, is we have now gotten so good at this activity that we can, in fact, build algorithms that do this extremely well, that replicates cardiologists. In fact, to the point where they do better than cardiologists because they get rid of the noise that humans have when they look at things. Pretty striking. Unfortunately, there is bad news. It does very badly at finding sudden cardiac death. Why does it do badly at finding sudden cardiac death? Because it can only do as well as cardiologists can. And we just don't know that much about what causes sudden cardiac death. So the ceiling of this algorithm is fundamentally limited by our current clinical knowledge. Sudden cardiac death is a medical mystery. Many people die where when we go back and look at their EKGs, doctors agree that EKG looks normal. Maybe there's no signal in the EKG. Maybe we need another measurement tool. Who knows? It's a medical marvel. How would we do it if we were to try and take the same problem and approach it as a bicycle for the mind? Well, as a bicycle for the mind, what we'd have to say is, don't tell me what I already see in the X-ray. I can get there with my own mind and the EKG. I can get there. Take me places I couldn't. So let's build a different algorithm. Let's not automate clinical judgment. Let's actually get a data set where we say this person had this EKG and they had sudden cardiac death, this person did not. Now we're going to predict the actual outcome, not what we think, but what nature drew. Now there's a possibility that algorithms can discover something that we didn't know, a possibility that this bicycle can take us to an unimagined place for a problem that we can all agree matters. And that's what we did. We got a bunch of death certificate data from Sweden, had a huge sample that we were able to then build such an algorithm. And I'll skip some of the details. In essence, what the algorithm does is it finds about 7% of people who have extremely high risk. What do I mean by high risk? High risk is that it's more than high enough for us to give a pacemaker. These are all people that humans looking at these EKGs cannot see anything, but the algorithm reliably finds a problem that we can now put a pacemaker in and save lives. To me, that is the fundamental difference between automation and bicycles. Automation has a ceiling of human understanding. Bicycles, the only ceiling is in the creativity of asking questions. If you believe we have come to understand the world around us, and the only thing we need left to do is to automate that knowledge, the left side is for you. But if you believe there are many mysteries, many things we have yet to learn, many things we have yet to discover, many advances to be had, I believe the right side is for you, and that feeling of computing is what we need. It is also very different to build a bicycle than to build automation. Automation is quite demanding. The bar is high. You have to build an algorithm that gets everything right before you can automate. Everything has to be right. On the other hand, the bar is low. I'm not telling you I've understood all of sudden cardiac death. I've just said we found something we didn't know before. Let's understand what that is. Let's make sense of it. Let's now start doing animal studies. We just need to get some insight. Let me give you another example of this. Well, this is work we've done in the criminal justice system in the United States. So every year in the United States, there are about 12 million arrests. That's a shocking number for a country with 250 million people, 280 million people. The US is extremely good at one thing, arresting people. Right after arrest, there is a question that a judge must answer. Should the defendant wait at home or wait in jail for the trial? It's a pretty important question, since most jurisdictions, we end up having, if jailed, the defendant can stay for about 2 to 3 months in jail. So it's a pretty consequential thing. What we did in this context is we built an algorithm that asked the question, can we improve on judicial decision-making? And it turns out you can improve on judicial decision. You can actually help the judge choose better, not by a little, but by a lot. So to calibrate it, you can keep crime rates fixed and reduce jail populations by 40%. So you can get the same level of crime with 60% of the people in jail. You can basically close jails in July. And you can reduce racial disparities. But let's go further. What is the judge getting wrong? Why are they making this mistake? Not can algorithms improve judicial making, but why can algorithms improve judicial decision making? Now you notice what we can do. So far the camera has been on the person that's dying, the defendant, the risk, but now let's turn the camera on the decision maker and ask, how do they decide? Let's build a predictive model of the judge. When you do that, you get something quite striking. I'm now going to tell you the top 5 things that predict whether the judge will jail somebody. Okay? The 5th most important thing is whether the person's current charge is a drug crime. The 4th most important thing is whether the current charge is a felony crime. The 3rd, property crime. 2nd, whether it's a violent crime. All right, audience participation time. Who wants to guess what kind of, why am I pointing over there? I guess I should point over here. Is that so that you guys can see me and also see me? Oh, that's pretty good. I have a body double. This is great. Anyone want to guess what the single most important factor is? Which current charge is missing? Race? That's an interesting one. Apparently you've been to America. Yeah. Recidivism, great. It is none of those. You might have guessed the current charge, since all of these are current charges. It's sort of a current charge. It's the current charge of having the wrong face. The mugshot is the single most important factor. But this is very misleading. I'm lying to you. I'm lying to you because when I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you might think mugshot matters, so does current charge. No. If I form a new predictor using just the mugshot, when I say mugshot, I literally mean the pixels. I didn't create any features, it's just the pixels of the mugshot. The pixels of the mugshot alone, if I just predict, will this person be released, not using their arrest record, not using just the pixels, that predictor explains about half of the predictable variation in the judge's decision. That's crazy. So now the question comes, what in the mugshot? It's an interesting technical question now, because the algorithm is a bit of a black box. As people, we understand faces, but I need you to tell me what in the face so I can kind of understand what's happening. We kind of have no common language. But when you start building bicycles for the mind, this is where things getting interesting. Now you've got to build something that someone can ride. You've got to say, I'm a person. I need to be able to ride this thing. I can't just have you sit behind a black box. So some of this work is therefore building a communication procedure where the people can talk to the algorithm. That's what we did. That communication procedure is somewhat technical. The consequence of it will be discovered features, but let me give you a sense of it. The algorithm has discovered something, but people are going to name it. How are they going to name it? The algorithm is going to communicate using pairs of faces. It's going to take a single face, and it's going to morph the face in a direction to say, this is how I would change the face to maximally increase chance of jailing. And I'm going to have people, not me, just people in experiments, look at those and start getting a sense. They're kind of communicating through images. So they might look at something like this. They might look at dozens of these. And at the end, they'd say, after looking at this, what do you think mattered? And then we'd go and test if that thing matters. I'm going to tell you two of the features that came out. The first one you can sort of see in this guy. I didn't pick him for this reason, but you can kind of see in this guy. The first feature is well-groomed. It turns out that if you're well-groomed, and I can see some of you in the audience are going to be in trouble, if you're well-groomed, you're much less likely to be jailed. When I say much less likely, I mean something of the order of magnitude, about half of the size of having committed a violent crime or murder, just for shaving and cutting your hair. The second feature, which has actually turned out to be bigger in magnitude, you can see in this photo. These are not real people. These are all synthetic photos. You can sort of see it if you look at this. It's, I think in the paper we call it full-faced, but in my head I call it fat-faced. It just seems wrong to write an academic paper with the phrase fat-faced in it. I don't know why, but anyway, so it's full-faced, fat-faced. Here's an interesting thing about fat-faced. I'm sure the minute you all saw well-groomed, you're like, I know what happens here. Well-groomed means more likely to be released. But which way does fat-faced go? Raise your hand if you think fat-faced people are more likely to be released. Okay, raise your hand if you think fat-faced people are more likely to be jailed. It goes about half. No, I'd say fat-faced has a majority here. If there's one thing we've learned about democracy is that it doesn't always work. Fat-faced is, in fact, more likely to be released. So shave, get a haircut, and eat something. And again, the magnitude of this is on the order of magnitude about half the effect of a violent crime or murder. These are large magnitudes. Why am I telling you this? When you show these results to judges, their response is, oh my God, I didn't know I was doing that. Now, we could spend time automating judges. Many of you in this room, probably all of you, are expert decision makers in some way, shape, or form. The judge is an expert decision maker. Like you, the judge wants to know, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? Give me some feedback. We have started the process in what I'm sharing with you of creating for the judge a mirror, a private mirror. They can look at their own past cases and learn about themselves. This is not just specific to the judge. Think of how many experts there are in the world who actually get almost no feedback and certainly no capacity to algorithmically analyze their past decisions. If you're a star sports player, you usually have a coach who sits with you after each game, and you watch each play one by one, review the tape. If you're a judge, I mean, obviously, judging isn't as important as football, but if you're a judge, you have no ability to review the tape. Any expert decision maker, no ability to read the tape. But to me, the mirror is an example, just one example of the kind of bicycles that we could easily start building to great consequences. The judges we talk to are not happy that this is what they're doing, and they want help in figuring that out, learning it, and what they can do about it. So let's go back to this question. We're in 2024. What's the future of work? What's the future of society? I think the most important point in this figure has nothing to do with those questions. It has to do with the thing on top. The idea that we are engaging in a bit of fortune telling, that we're engaging in a bit of prediction. Whenever we ask these questions, people ask us to predict. I think that's entirely wrong because it is not a prediction. It is a choice. We stand at a crossroads today where we have two choices as to how computing will be built out, how AI will go. Will we go in the direction of automation, or will we go in the direction of building bicycles for the mind? It's not a choice. It's not prediction. It's a choice. And what I want to say is these are two very different futures that are ahead of us. Which future do we want? That's the question we should be asking. And how do we realize that future? Now, of course, you might say, that doesn't sound right to me. I feel like we're going to choose this. Why does it feel like we are choosing this? In part because it sometimes makes, in the very recent last few years, it's often portrayed that this is an inevitable consequence of machine learning. I don't think it is. And to see that it's not an inevitable consequence, you kind of have to understand something about how machine learning was developed. There's two components to modern machine learning that we have today. The first is something called the common task framework. Underlying almost every innovation, whether it's in language or in vision, everything, was simple common tasks that many people competed on. So here are a few. The top is called MNIST. It's the hand digit recognition. You'd be given a square and there'd be a handwritten digit, and the algorithm had to recognize what's the digit. Things got more complicated. ImageNet was there'd be an image, and the algorithm had to recognize, is there a dog, is there a cat in this photo? These were all public data sets in which teams around the world competed to then start doing well at these tasks. You've seen one version of this. The protein folding Nobel Prize was a result of a common task. We had big protein folding data sets. But much of the innovation we've had in computer vision was due to this. Deep learning, which many of you are now familiar with, took off because it did very well in both the ImageNet and the MNIST data set. That was the proof of concept. Before deep learning succeeded at these things, there was a lot of discussion as to what would be the right way of doing things. In other words, the common task we have chosen has resulted in the technology we have today. Similarly, these fields took on some ambitious builds, self-driving cars, large language models. And again, that put pressure on the system. So I would argue we are headed here because both the common tasks frameworks we've had and the ambitious builds we've chosen are all automation. What is the digit here? Is there a dog here? Self-driving car, LLM. It's all, we just inadvertently chose a set of things which were automation, which has made it easier for us to have tech that automates. But there's no reason we can't do this for bicycles of the mind. And I think that's the direction we should head in. I think we need to create common tasks. We have to figure out what those are. I think we need to start building ambitious builds. I'll give you one example of an ambitious build. I'm trying to figure out for this audience. I have three here. I will do the top left one. Here would be an ambitious build. When you're a teacher, you really don't know what's going on in a student's head. You don't really have a sense. Say you're teaching math. The one thing you know is they're not getting it right, but you don't quite know what they've misunderstood. It's quite hard as a teacher. You kind of plot around. If you remember learning, it was equally hard from that direction. They're trying to give you an explanation. It's because the teacher doesn't have a map of the maze that the student is walking in. With enough data, could we build a map of the student's mind? For example, if I had data not on what you got right, but the steps you took, could an algorithm do that? We're already having quite some success at that activity. We got a large data set together of the steps students took, and you're finding algorithms can actually get pretty good at, much like with judges and faces, learning things about the kind of mistakes students make, some of which are quite surprising and novel to teachers. So let me just conclude by saying, I tried to find a picture of a skyscraper. This is the only skyscraper I could find. I didn't even know where this is. I put a picture. Does anyone know? No. Anyway, moving along. So the skyscraper here, I put this because this is a tech stack. And the thing about tech stacks, if you're not familiar, is that the further down something is in the tech stack, the harder it is to change. As society, we are building the AI tech stack today. The bottom of the tech stack is going to get harder and harder to change. It's going to be the existing tools right now favor this, and we need new tools. The easy to get data looks like this, and we'll need harder to get data. So that it's going to be harder to do the thing on the right. But I think that's what we should do. I want to make this a call to action. I think this is the future we should all try to choose. I think as academics, we need to start doing things that are more bilingual, What I mean by that is when I did behavioral economics, I tried to summarize all of behavioral economics in one slide. This is my best attempt to do that. I don't know if you guys see why, but this is my favorite slide of all time. We need to be bilingual. I think as academics, we need to combine what we know about people with what we know about algorithms. I think we need to focus on building, which is something computer scientists have done very well. Many people only see the pinnacle of building, like this is a transformer architecture. Many of you probably think the transformer architecture is a consequence of something at OpenAI. Maybe you know a Google paper that came up with it. In fact, the transformer architecture is very much the linear descendant of a ton of academic research. Attention came out of the Bengio lab. Neural networks came out of this. The private sector is fantastic at scaling, but academia is where in this sector innovation has happened, and it's happened because computer scientists have focused on building. I think we need to focus on building things. I think that in the work I'm doing, we have a center that we're starting called Tools of Thought at MIT. There are fantastic people at Zurich who are doing this, some of the best people in this. I put some names up who I think are very much in this space. So I think academics need to go. I think philanthropy needs to go in this direction, because I think right now the way philanthropy is focused on is it's sort of focused on defense. Oh, how do we get AI safety? I don't think we should just be doing defense. We should be focusing on offense. We should change the arc to put us on a path towards augmentation. We need ambitious builds for meaningful problems and not just safety of whatever is being built right now. That's also important, but that shouldn't be our sole ground game. And finally, I think in the business world, I would say automation is short-term profitable, but I think strategic opportunities exist that are more long-term for augmentation. In my own work, we have a company called Dandelion that's very much focused on the idea that if we're going to do AI in health, we have to take a different approach. I don't think automating doctors is the way to go. I think it's creating the data needed to do this other stuff. So let me just end on a different note, going back to the skyscraper. Because the software stack is being built up, it's hard to do this now, but it's going to get harder and harder to do this in the future because the automation stack is building up fast. So I think we have a window of opportunity, and that window of opportunity is now, and I think we should take that window of opportunity to build the future we want. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sendhil. Okay, lots to unpack there. I feel like I would have a few follow-up questions for you, but as promised, we're actually going to have the follow-up discussion with a couple more people who are going to be joining us now on the panel. So, of course, Sendhil, we just heard from, already met, Professor of Economics and Computer Science at MIT. Joining him is someone with over 25 years of experience in the tech industry, where she has been a driving force for innovation, sustainability, and digital transformation across diverse cultures and organizations. Since joining Microsoft in 2021, she's been a champion for leveraging technology to tackle global challenges. Prior to this, she led cloud-first strategies at Accenture and continues to contribute to the tech ecosystem through her roles on the Executive Committee of Digital Switzerland, among others. She is also a passionate advocate for women in leadership and was recently recognized as one of Switzerland's digital shapers in 2022 and as one of the top 100 by Women in Business magazine. So please, let's give a warm welcome to CEO of Microsoft Switzerland, Katrin Hinkel. Thank you. Welcome. And rounding out our conversation is an expert in industrial organization, antitrust, and competition policy. His research spans critical topics such as digital platforms, vertical integration, public service broadcasting, and media economics. Currently, he's a professor at the University of Zurich, where his work has influenced how we think about regulation and competition in today's fast-evolving markets. He served as the chief economist at the Federal Communications Commission and was co-director at the Industrial Organization Program at the Center for Economic Policy Research. Most recently, he joined Zalando in 2022 as their inaugural chief economist, where he continues to apply economic insights to real-world business challenges. Please welcome Professor Gregory Crawford. All right, welcome to all of you. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to all of our audiences and at home, we will have time for questions afterwards. And so feel free to use that Mentimeter app, either submit a question or like one, and you know the drill. It's gonna, the more you like it, the higher it's gonna be ranked, and we'll definitely get to it, I'm hoping. Okay, all right, so just to kind of get us started here, of course, AI is often described as a game changer, right, for the global economy. I think that's the word, AI and game changing, with promises that range from solving labor shortages to driving unprecedented innovation. But of course, this comes with a growing skepticism about whether these promises really match up to reality, right? So given your diverse backgrounds, we're gonna quickly, whatever comes to mind first, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest. How overhyped is AI's current role in the global economy, and why? Gregory.
8.
Okay.
Okay. Why? Because I think that while what we've seen in large language models is genuinely revolutionary for language applications, and I don't think it's necessarily overhyped from a societal perspective, in terms of language use cases. It may be overhyped in terms of stock valuations, because there's some competition that will hopefully distribute those rents to consumers. But I have, and I'm happy to drill deeper in that conversation, I question its, whether it's a general purpose technology, that same model is a general purpose technology for other very large mainstream use cases. I think we're going to need to see sort of comparable models to be built, and that's going to be expensive.
I'm wondering what you think to that, but we'll get there. Katrin, on a scale of 1 to 10.
It depends. I would say I would go rather low, 4 maybe. But if you listen to some of the more fearful reports about AI, you could say it's overhyped at the level of 10 plus, because there's things that are talked about that AI will definitely not be doing, and not, if we set the right direction at this point in time, but there's a lot we can do to make it very positive for us. The other reason I say 4 is because I already see a lot of application that is very real. So we have research cycles for medication being shortened dramatically. We have research cycles for, inventing better batteries shortened dramatically. We have, machine-human interaction made a lot easier, and to the benefit of humans today, using that kind of technology. So I can go into more and more examples of that, but I can see with our customers that this is making a real difference in day-to-day lives and business.
All right.
So I'm going to give 2 numbers, because economists, what's the old
No
joke?
surprise there.
Economists have 2 hands.
Yes.
So, and I think it's very similar to what you said. I think I'd give a 1 and a 10, which is, I think the 1 is very much, I am so optimistic about what can be done. I think it is unbelievably powerful. The 10, because I think when Europeans landed in the Americas, one of the tragedies was they brought with them viruses to which natives did not have any defenses, and it's just these diseases wiped through. When I look at these large language models, they are in many ways a virus like that, but for the mind. And here is their effect on the mind. We sit with them, we use them. It is impossible for us not to believe, oh my God, this thing is intelligent. It's just very hard. They talk to you as if it's a person. It has conversations. That virus, that thing which on the surface looks human and intelligent, but actually behind the scenes it is not what you think and has no intelligence, that's the virus that is sweeping through today, and it has led to some insane hype where it's almost frustrating, where you're like, wow, we did this very cool thing, we did this, discovered problems of judges, and people are like, can't you just ask ChatGPT and have it tell you the answer? I'm like, what are we even talking about here? It's not a magic box. So I'm torn between the 10 and the 1, which is, I think, what you were saying, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. That people are react the way you described to ChatGPT. But to me, the key question is these foundation models in text are amazing, and in drug discovery, and we've seen a few very powerful use cases, right? But to me, for it to have the really kind of impact that it has to have, we have to think of ways to adapt it to other business and policy and societal problems. And to me, that's not at all obvious, because like if you can do it out of the box, yes, then the hype is deserved. But I just see lots of frictions that need to be overcome in order to apply it more broadly than the current use cases that we see right now. But maybe others disagree.
Do you? Anything else to add? I don't know. I see the smiling, and I'm not sure if this is something to add.
I think the power that lies in that, if you look at how it's applied, is I really like your bicycle model. Microsoft talks about co-pilots. The power is not that AI solves everything that needs to be solving, because sometimes it doesn't even know what needs to be solving, most of the times actually. It's us who give that direction. It's us who use the data. It's us who take better educated decisions based on AI. So I think it's about how do we position this technology alongside us humans that gives the answer to the questions. It's not the answer to all questions. That is 42, we all know. But so it's not the answer to all questions. It's the bicycle that we invent to help us get much better answers much faster. But it's still us who need to decide which are the answers that we need.
I don't want to. Sendhil, do you want to come in? Because I have a reply to that. But yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. So look, I was in Seattle over the weekend, and and Gen AI was a big topic, and so I heard about Time GPT. Okay, so we have ChatGPT, a language model. This Time GPT, and this is just what someone told me, so hopefully this is right.
Okay.
But even if it's not right, you can imagine it, right? Which it says, imagine all the time series data on the internet, right? And we're going to use that in the way that large language models have used all the text on the internet to train a foundation model, right? And then the question is, could I use that? Imagine this Time GPT is just this incredible predictor of time series. Now, I work at Zalando. We have all kinds of problems that rely on. So Zalando, for those that don't know, is the largest European fashion e-commerce platform. And so we have, for example, pricing time series, right? I mean, this is a real problem we have that we devote lots of resources to. Do I believe that I could just so we have lots of proprietary data on our customers and the purchases they make based on the prices we charge. Could I feed that into a time GPT and expect that it would predict prices for us better than our current models? I'm sorry, I don't. I just don't. And I think, so for that, now that's one specific use case that's very relevant to business. I mean, business is price, right? So I think, I do think I could imagine a pricing foundation model, but it would require lots of source data on price series. It would require lots of research and compute time. It would require lots of integration with companies' existing organizational processes. Could that come? Yes, but at significant cost. So, so that's a little bit, that's just one example, but it's that same logic. If we take any business or policy or societal decision, I think we have to think, could the existing models apply there? And if not, then we need new models, and that's where the cost comes in.
Right.
And I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I think we're actually saying the same thing. I think where we're probably sound like we're saying something different is we're responding to different time horizons. Like if I take what is claimed right now by some of the biggest proponents, it's crazy. Yeah. It just makes no sense. Yeah. That's what you're reacting to.
I mean,
and the evidence doesn't back it up. Whatever. And I think, but at the longer horizon, at the 10, if we put it, I think what's happened is in the last 4 years, we went from having somewhat reasonable expectations to insane expectations. But the reasonable expectations were fantastic. Like we can add a lot of business value. We can add a lot of social value today. Can we just have one algorithm out of the box that solves a bunch of stuff? No. But the way I think about this is like, you guys have done this work, GitHub's done this work on something as simple as Code Copilot. It's not out of the box that it worked. There is constant work on making those algorithms work better. There's still innovation on Code Copilot. That's the most narrow task, coding. But we're willing to put energy into it. But if we're willing to put time and energy into that, what about for judges? What about for pricing? What about, it's just, I think we just have to have a more reasonable view that this is a fantastic technology, not a magic technology.
Yeah. And let me pick up on that as well. I mean, I think, sorry.
Shortly. No.
Shortly. I think the thing that's really revolutionary, where there is not maybe enough hype, is this idea that models can somehow capture well attention, right? So that in these foundation models, so that is an innovation. And so to the extent that that innovation can be applied elsewhere, then I agree.
Okay.
But it comes with time and cost. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just wanted to.
It's good thing you put me next to you, right?
That's what I call time for a second. Yes, because we'd also like to. I'd like to hear a minute from the audience. You know, we mentioned the polls, and so I want you to go ahead and go to your Mentimeter poll app, and we want to know how often you interact with AI. You know, because here we are, we talk about all of these different uses. You know, is it overhyped? Is it not? Just out of curiosity, how often people actually use AI? And I can't help but wondering how many people may only be referring to text. But you know, there's all kinds. There's other kinds of applications where you could be using AI in your life. But that'll be interesting to see.
Spotify has a new AI DJ. You know.
Oh.
All
right.
Can I give one example of an AI that I think everyone has used,
yes.
which is very controversial?
Okay.
It's because you're at Microsoft. Yeah. The example I always use of an AI is Excel. It's so in the rearview mirror, you have forgotten that the ability to do millions of calculations, complex calculations in a split second, would have been unimaginable in 1950.
All right, so I think everybody's going to...
Yeah, I think everybody's used Excel. But don't count
but
that in the poll.
But you're right. You're right.
It's amazing.
It was one of the first predictive, really, programs that we were all using. You know, Excel. What's that?
Before we get the answer, there's recently done a study in Switzerland actually on how many people in businesses actually use AI, and the answer, the study came to the conclusion that about 80% of people use AI almost on a daily basis for their work.
Interesting.
What scares me is if I look at, not 80% of the companies have a way for their people to actually use AI safely. So that's a bit the scary part, but 80% is a huge number in such a short time frame.
Yeah, that is crazy. That's amazing. I think, do we have the results? Are they there? Oh, here they are. Here we go. So daily, 58%. 59, still climbing. Have some.
90.
Yeah, it's climbing as we watch it.
Yeah, yes. 31. It's actually kind of fun. I always enjoy it. 31% use it weekly, 8% rarely, 2% never. Wow.
It's worth checking out.
Oh yeah.
All right. What do we think? I mean, are we at all surprised or by these results?
I think the 2% who say never must not appreciate that, like you said, Spotify playlist, Netflix recommenders.
Yeah, maybe just not
your
tech
Amazon recommendation. Behind the scenes, there's a lot more AI in your daily life, I think. Or these are 2%. Well, we know they have a phone because they actually filled out the poll. So at least, okay, it can't be that they're total technophobes.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're back
More
to the
questions?
title of the.
No.
I know, right? Actually, we have a lot of questions already coming in, but let's continue talking just for a little bit because, of course, we've already touched on it. There's always with AI, there's always the human element, right? And the interaction or the impact. You've already you touched a little bit on this. Maybe probably more than a little bit on the Mind on the Bicycle. Presentation, but how can how do you see these human traits coexisting then with even enhancing the AI?
I think
and economies?
I think something you said is the most fundamental thing, which is that when you leave very narrow problems and you move to anything in the world we inhabit, the objective, the goal, is never clear-cut, clearly specified, well specified in a data set. I think that's what makes automation so dangerous. Automation works well, not just when you have an algorithm that can do something, but when the objective is so specifiable that you can represent it in a data set or in code. How few problems in the business world have such even things that you think are well specified, like build a resume screener that finds a good employee. What's a good employee? I mean, yeah, we can come up with 8 proxies. How do you weight them? I don't know. So most problems, as you said, I mean, I think that's why it's almost inevitable that if we're going to use these tools, we have to confront the fact that we're going to have to drive them. And that interaction, I don't think is a convenient thing. It's an essential thing, unless, and that's what I see as dangerous, people destroy that complexity in the rush to automate. And that is happening in some places. Like even when you look at call centers, when people automate the call center, what do they look at? They look at a few metrics. But in many ways, for some firms, I'd be curious if this is true to yours, your call center employee is a big part of your brand. You spend millions, tens of millions on brand marketing over here. That's not part of what you did when you built your chatbot to automate the employee. You just left out huge components. And so I just fear that in a bunch of this work, when we automate, we have just narrowed our objective, much to our detriment.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. So, because this absolutely touches on something we talk about internally at Zalando is, so even if, and I'll reflect back a little bit what I think I heard you say, is even if, say, especially Gen AI chatbot, or replacing customer service is often a Gen AI application, even if it performs better on average, it hallucinates, right? And these hallucinations mean you get a small number of extraordinarily bad customer experiences, right? And that doesn't happen in the case of humans. And so I think when you talk about automating and so it's fine if I'm at my desk and it gives me a bad answer, I'll just say, okay, I'll ask it again, right? And that's the other thing about Gen AI. These one feature of them is that they roll the dice, right? You won't get the same answer twice. So in whatever you ask them, it'll roll the dice, and sometimes you get a bad roll. And so if you ask it again, you might get a better answer, or you might average the 2 answers, or take the best from each.
This is how my grad students treat me.
Yeah. So when you think about building those into automated processes within a company or within a society, I don't think I want a judge to roll the dice, right? I want some human judgment actually playing a role there. And I think that's also then a friction, is that for use cases where hallucinations are no big deal, fine, sure. But there are many, many use cases where those tail outcomes matter a lot. And then that reduces the attractiveness of the technology.
I mean, it's a super broad topic. And the way you just described it, I would like to say that depending on context, I would fully agree or fully disagree with what you're saying. So, as an example, when you look at AI application in the workplace, where the data set is not everything in the internet, but a more defined database of things that we deal with in an organization, then the results are very different, and there's much less hallucination and much better application. So if you think of a call center agent that can question the catalog or the data that's there right there when he speaks with a customer, and it's based on the information of the organization, then the results for the whole call are much better than in any case than if it's if the person is not using it. And I think the other piece to really keep in mind in that context is what you talked about when you talked about the different biases and so on. Humans also take decisions. They do. I don't. We don't use the word hallucinate because it's in a different context with humans, but humans make up things when they're very often not data-based in their decisions and in their reflections. And that's where AI can also help to make sure that that you have access to the data. In the past, that was super difficult because there's loads of data, even in a company, and really to find the right data and really go there and do the analysis. And I call up my CFO, and all of that has become a lot easier because I now have a way to interact with the data that helps me take a decision that's a lot more fact-based than it was in the past.
Yeah.
Can I give an example of a study that builds on what you're saying? You gave the example of the call center employee that then has an assistant. There's this fantastic study that looks at the effect of a chatbot assistant that just gives suggestions of what you might want to say, just like suggestions of it. And what they found was, one, they found that it took the low-performing call center employees and really moved them up. Kind of obvious. But then that's where the story gets interesting. They used these examples where the chatbot had power outages, where it just went down for service. It wasn't power. And what they showed is that when it happened early, the low end of the distribution was just not very good. But after about 3 months, you could remove the chatbot completely, and the low employees were actually as good as the good employees. That it was a training tool as much as an assistant tool, which is fantastic if you think about what it was doing. Was it was taking the best employees on whom it was trained and kind of, helping the not as good employees learn a little bit. It was fantastic. It's just such a good study because it kind of shows how the two working together can be super powerful.
So I don't think we disagree in the end. What my earlier comment was about fully automated and automated, say Gen AI applications. But as an augmentation, I totally agree with you.
And I think that's the point.
Yeah.
It has to be an augmentation, a bicycle, a co-pilot.
Totally.
Yeah.
And this is where Microsoft is headed, augmentation or Copilot.
That's absolutely the strategy. That's why how we came up with that name, that brand name of Copilot in the first place, because the human will always be the pilot, the one that decides. Oftentimes I get a question whether management can be replaced by AI at some point, which is a similar question to what you alluded to earlier. And my answer to it is, absolutely no, because it's about the direction of the decisions that you take based on the information that you get that makes the difference. I can not imagine a world where AI takes the decisions for us, but it can help us a lot in the background. So imagine a world where, I don't know, you come into the office and you in the morning you go through your emails, and then an autonomous agent has taken care of something. So they saw your email from a customer, they've gone into the CRM system and looked at the data that's available. They've added a little bit of what's happening in the context of the company right now, last quarterly earnings and so on. And it is sort of, rather you just opening that email, you get the full context already presented. I mean, that makes my life a lot easier. And that's the kind of, that's what I'm thinking about. It's always augmentation, it's never decision making, and it's never direction setting.
That's a fantastic example. I'll say one quick thing, which is, if you look at even very high-skilled workers, and you just look at what they do on a minute-by-minute basis, highly skilled, high-paid workers, so much time goes to incredibly rote activity. Like literal click on this, look at that, go to that, look at that. It's crazy. The amount of human capital you could free up is fantastic.
Yes, which kind of along the lines of something Katrin was saying, how are companies then leveraging AI to drive their business strategies, their competitiveness? Can you share some examples of how AI is doing this in the decision-making process?
Spend the rest of the afternoon with examples.
Just a couple. I'm sure they'll also chime in. So
I think just to, before I get into the examples, the question when I speak with companies, C-level, and they ask me, so how can I apply AI? Then my question back is, what is your most prominent business problem that you think technology can help you with? Because that's where it starts. It's about the business problem. It's not about using AI in that sense. So there's lots of examples, even in Switzerland, where we see a lot of application. By the way, rather quick. So Switzerland is very open-minded in trying out the technology. I talked about the 80% using it in the workspace. And we see, small startups, Planted is using it to do production line optimization and sustainability. Then there's ABBs using it in the shop floor to do machine human communication. We can see it in the life science companies that use it for drug development. There's a lot happening here. Customer experience is a lot. We talked about call center, but really making sure that those agents have all the information and automated and right at their fingertips. Because AI, Gen AI can listen to a phone call and actually provide you the information that the customer is asking for while you're still thinking or taking notes or typing something into the system. So those kinds of examples we see all the time.
Mm-hmm. Is this the same for e-commerce? Or?
Yeah. So I would yes. The short answer is yes, but I would add a little flavor in the sense that AI is a prediction technology, and prediction technologies have been around a long time. Right, so we've been using it for forecasting, we've been using it for recommendations, we've been using it for all kinds of things like this. What's relatively new in the last 3 years is the generative AI, right? So and I think here, at least for Zalando, we're using it quite a bit. So we have a new product called Zalando Assistant, which allows users, instead of typing what they're looking for, like summer dress, you can say, I'd like a summer dress for my daughter for a wedding we're having with her cousin or something, and then it'll use those fields to pick out the most relevant assortment. And I think, it's not ours, but I mentioned Spotify now has an AI DJ, right, which does the same kind of idea. They even have it, again, with generative AI. They licensed the voice of one of their employees so that they have
an actual voice,
like being a DJ for whatever playlist. And you can say, can I have something like sort of bluesy rock, right, or something, or rocky blues, I don't know, either way. And so I think what you're seeing now is lots of companies exploring the application of generative AI. So at this conference I was at, for example, Amazon, a worker there was presenting work on titles for their product display pages, right? So often people say, God, there's like 70 words in that title, right? Is that really helpful? So there's, using Gen AI to not just on the title, but at various aspects, and again, trying to improve the customer experience, trying to enhance the the comprehensibility of their products.
And there's also a huge application in the legal area.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, analyzing contracts, a lot of insurers use it to actually compare contracts, find out the risk situation in a specific contract, and that just gives their staff a much different starting point to actually do the work that's really relevant in determining the risk that the company is taking. Another one is in finance, where I see a lot of application. Sales there's a lot of application in interacting with the CRM system, but also predicting where the business may go, and all of that is just a lot of data work in the way. But as you rightly say, AI, it's a combination of AI and Gen AI. In a lot of cases, AI has been around for a long time, and Gen AI just makes the interaction so much easier and so much more convenient for even people with lower education levels, because they don't think of the shop floor example that I used, where you can actually interact with the machine through natural language rather than typing and entering a computer and all of that.
That just makes me wonder, Sendhil, is it equaling the playing? Is it leveling the playing field? When we look at inequality?
Well, let me argue there's one piece of inequality that's sort of lurking out in the background here, which we haven't touched on, which is, I think, all the business examples are companies doing what they should be doing, which is following profits and doing the things that make sense. But civil society is, I think, it's not, to even say they're way behind, they're not even in the race. And there are just as many important problems. I mean, you guys are correctly saying, well, we've had predictive stuff for a while. It's like civil society is not there. Mm-hmm. And just to make it as sharp as possible, think of how many people work just on the Spotify recommender system. Okay, just getting songs. Now, consider a student graduating, trying to figure out what would make a good career. A student entering college, trying to figure out what would make a major. An unemployed person trying to figure out where they should search. All these are recommender system problems. All of these people could use help on a problem that's just a little bit more important than what music I should listen to next.
Fair enough.
And the amount of money we have spent, resources we have spent on solving those recommender systems problems,
right?
It's not even the rounding. I mean, it is zero. And so civil society is so behind, it's sad. There are many, many, many problems that are as important as all the good business ones you guys have listed. Like, those should be solved, and they are being solved. But there's no opportunity for this. And so I'm actually a little despondent that so much of civil society has sort of so exclusively focused on the regulatory angle, which we need to, fine. The safety angle, that's fine. But there are real problems that real people have. In the US, we have very deep poverty. Mm-hmm. And if you're a low-income person, you have to navigate a bunch of benefits websites. Why is there no red tape copilot? I mean, like, those people need it as much, if not more, than coders. And you can just list these examples, and there's just not enough of a concerted effort to build algorithms in the public interest.
Why? Greg, you're itching.
I think it's on people like me. Yeah, I think that's the problem. I think that civil society needs academics initially to make the push to move from the world of R&D to do the kind of civil investment to say, look, let us build. It needs free labor because it's not going to be the profit motive. And academics have, like David Yanagazawa-Drad is trying to do some stuff in Ghana. There are people trying to do stuff. And I think we need to catalyze the kind of work that you need. That civil society on its own is not going to get there. I think academic R&D is the thing that's needed, and I think we just don't have enough of that. And I think you guys can bring a lot of talent to it too. I think there's enough talent. I think we can do this, and it's the biggest hole I see.
Okay.
I couldn't agree more, both with the premise that there are huge problems in society that need work, and you asked why. I mean, economics is about incentives, right? So there's the profit motive, and therefore where you can earn greater profits, there's lots of work, and where there's not the profit motive, you don't see it, right? So I think we as a society then have to think about how do we provide incentives for, and you articulated one, academics can sort of work of their own sort of volition to try to increase public awareness, but ultimately I think, it's going to require concerted societal political effort to provide those incentives, to provide the data. I mean, that governments can do that. Governments have, you see this already in the Scandinavian countries where they have fabulous demographic and labor market data, but let's get other data and then provide that data to researchers who will happily give their time for free to have access to that kind of data to build the kind of recommender systems that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think it's yes, academia can help, but it's not entirely up to you. I think everyone has a role, and I include Microsoft has a role, and Microsoft talks about that role very openly. We're just, this year we're launching a program which is around educating, not our customers. Mm-hmm. So, the customer space is out of that. It's educating people in society, and that's students, that is people that are between jobs. It's many different. So we're actually investing money into that, And there's many other pockets where we engage, and I think there is a responsibility of companies to engage in that. We will not, it will not be one party that solves it. That one is the good thing is we do have an opportunity here as well, and that goes a bit back to the point that you made. It's us who decide how this world is going to happen, and we do need regulation around the topic. We do need some rules, and that we set ourselves in how we want to use this technology. It is a defining technology that is, I would compare with, when electricity was invented or when the printing press was invented. Like it's really big, and we have, and that motivates me. We have an opportunity to define how we want to use it. We're not there in all places, but it can solve some of those big problems that we need to be solving as a society.
And you just mentioned regulation. I think you both mentioned it in passing, but I'm interested. Then, do governments need to be more proactive?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so, and I'll let the other two speak to maybe the safety parts of regulation. Where I think governments do need to be proactive, and this actually touched on the beginning of your last question about inequality, right? Because I do fear that, look, we're from two big companies, right? And I do fear that, these are costly models to build, and they're costly models to apply. And I do think that there is, a tendency now, of course, you can make them available as APIs to small and medium-sized businesses, but to the extent that I fear there may be a return to size in the application of these new technologies. In other words, bigger companies may be able to better exploit them than smaller companies. And I think there's a concern, at least on my part in general, that we may have yet further incentives for inequality in society. And that is something that I think that governments have to consider, at least. Now, this is just conjecture. This is looking to the future, so it's not definitive in my mind, but it is definitely a concern. And then that, which feeds into, again, providing incentives for these tools to be used for the greater societal good. I think inequality can lead to the breakdown of civil society. I think we're seeing this certainly in the U.S. and to some extent in the U.K., Switzerland. We're actually quite lucky, but I worry that this is a force pushing us in an already dangerous direction.
Okay.
Full of government. Thoughts on regulation?
No, as I said before, I think regulation is absolutely necessary, and it is part of us deciding how we want to use the technology and what rules we want to give to the technology and how we want to use it for the benefit of society. There is huge risk of inequality, and we need to be mindful of that, and we need to address it. The good news is that all of us who are sitting here, we now have an opportunity to actually, and a responsibility to take those decisions and set the guardrails in the right way. So regulation is absolutely necessary. Do we get it always right in every place? Also, regulators to date are usually lawyers. Most of the time, it's lawyers. So now we expect those lawyers to understand a super complex technology, and they need to get it right. They know they need to get it right, and that that's a huge burden on them as well. So how do the right, and that's something where academia must play a big role. How do the right people come together to collaborate on that and to help on that we set the right guardrails. But I see it as a positive. It's our responsibility, but also our opportunity to set those guardrails.
All right, so on a more positive note then, looking ahead, Sendhil, what excites you the most about AI's role in transforming the economy over the next decade? Maybe not automated, but augmented AI.
I think I started this work in 2012 because I did a lot of research. I'll make the long story short. A lot of research into what have been the transformative things in history. And historically, the most transformative things have been things that are not inventions, but inventions that change how we invent. And for me, what drew me to the machine learning work is that I was like, oh, this is a thing that can change how we invent, that can change how we discover. And so to me, the exciting part is that I think if we put it to that mindset, I truly think we have a chance to not get level gains, but actually grow through a period where we actually get gains in growth rates and sort of lasting gains in growth rates, because whenever the rate of innovation changes, growth rates themselves start to go up. And I think that's pretty fantastic, because I think prolonged periods of elevated growth are just fantastic for society. And maybe it's not 10 years, maybe it'll take 5 or 8 to get started, but I think over the next 20 years, I think I'm pretty excited about that possibility.
All right. Katrin.
I think it's two things. One is, as I said, the opportunity to actually solve some of the big issues that we have around so many health, around sustainability, equality. There's this huge opportunity if we get it right, and that excites me. I think the other piece is that if you again think back in industry, I mentioned the printing press before. The printing press was invented in Germany, but the best use of technology was not in Germany. It was in the Netherlands. They made use of the printing press in a much better way than Germany did. And what that says is, and that's the same with AI. You don't need the technology can be applied, and in a different place than it was invented. And I fundamentally believe that Switzerland, as an example, is a great with academia, the way academia, large companies, smaller companies, education, all of this comes together. There's a huge opportunity to for countries to make it their own and really improve in the context, and they don't have to have invented the technology to really put it into to good use for the country.
How do they apply it?
Yeah. So my answer is going to be pretty similar to Sendhil's, which is, I agree that it's applications of the existing innovation. So innovations on top of the innovation, and especially if we just think of the language, ChatGPT, which everyone is familiar with, I think it's just an amazing tool for synthesizing enormous bodies of data, text, but and if you look at the successful applications, things like drug discovery, and things like just natural language generation, it's then thinking, wow, I now have this incredible new tool that can do all that stuff. And I guess my only caveat, so I'm super excited about that, is that can be both used for good as well as ill, right? And so we have to see how it plays. So I'm incredibly excited, but also a little bit scared.
I don't think you're alone. I don't think you're alone there. Speaking of a little bit scared, so we've quite a list of questions, but one of the most popular questions among the audience thus far is about labor, right? How it's going to impact your jobs. Now, we are going to get into that more in detail in the second part of the program, but to all of you, how can AI be used to upskill workers across different educational backgrounds rather than merely automating low-skilled roles? Who wants to take that first?
I just can't stop
You're
thinking about
to the labor.
I might as well. I can't stop thinking about the 2% of people who never used AI but came to an AI talk. I want to hear from them. No. And I also, as an American, I just learned that the Netherlands are not part of Germany. I mean, you learn something every day. I think that if you just go back to training at its core, training is very much one of the hardest human activities we have, like by far. It's got a bunch of components that make it very open for AI. So one component is that whenever we've had a successful training program, it's very hard to scale it meaningfully and keep the treatment effect, because it's a person delivering the training program. the next person isn't going to deliver it in the same way, and you just don't know how to keep that. So when I teach a class, the next person to teach, no, it's not that. But it's, so that element. The element of being able to experiment with curricula is very, very hard because it's a person delivering it. You can't really change it around. So why I'm saying this is because I think people have overlooked the big hole inside of the economy that is training and education. It's kind of the core for upskilling, but we've not had that much fundamental innovation in that area. And between the language capacities of these algorithms, the real-time ability to experiment with them, a variety of things, I think we're going to see a flourishing of just breakthroughs in training and education. And I think that's going to be the primary vehicle by which we'll see a fundamental change in how skilling happens and reskilling happens.
So
People are still involved. Go
let
ahead.
me be a little more pessimistic in the sense that, no, I don't, so first of all, I'm a competition economist, not a labor economist, and the next panel will be able to give you the expert opinion on this. But I think if we come back to the issue of incentives, right? So I think at the moment, firms will have incentives to maximize profits, and if they can maximize profits by augmenting some of their labor force and with these tools, and there are a fixed set of tasks, that's a key assumption, then they're going to need less labor, right? And so I totally agree that these technologies have incredible potential for upskilling and training and customized, personalized education. But, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but if I, as a non-expert, look at sort of the impact of globalization over the last 50 years, it was an incredible efficiency gains, but there were losers. And those gains weren't necessarily shared with the losers, right? So if these gains are not shared with the losers, then we're going to have trouble. Or it's going to be trouble for the losers, right? So that's why I'm concerned.
And again, not alone. The audience is also concerned. How does AI affect economic inequalities? What steps should be taken to make these technologies accessible in less developed regions and socioeconomic groups? We touched on this a little bit, but is there something to add?
It's a very important question. Let me start there, because of course there is a risk that we make the divide even worse. And so it's exactly the right question to ask. And I know that we are working on that question. We're actually developing not only strategies, but we already have things in place. We're working with humanitarian organizations and so on to actually get to that, but it's difficult. It is hard. You get to very fundamental questions around, you can't use AI, and I'm sure that's one of the questions, without electricity. Well, if you're in an environment in a country where electricity is scarce, then before you help people with AI, you need to go back and make sure that you can provide the electricity that is necessary, and so on. So it's a whole tale of questions, and you can go to our website. We have a lot of material there of thinking, but we're thinking about it. We're developing. We're taking step by step. It's questions that we are asking. We can't. Again, we cannot solve on our own, but it is absolutely top of mind, and that's what I meant when I said there's a lot of responsibility that comes with building technology.
I want to pause really quick and see if there's any questions in the room. Right here, we have a couple. Okay, good. We'll start. Oops, sorry. We're going to start with the gentleman in the front. Thank you.
Should I introduce myself?
Yes, just say your name, your affiliation.
Okay. So my name is Hani Selim. I'm a Swiss citizen, originally from Egypt, educated in Boston, Massachusetts, and soon the founder of a Center for Science and Strategic Studies. So my question goes to Mr. Sendhil. How do you assess AI agents' potential in revolutionizing economics decision-making in a way that could radically change the future of different sectors of an economy in a country like the US?
So just to unpack that a little bit, I think AI agents, for those of you who are not familiar, is I would say one of the new hot areas that people are getting into, which is agents that can go and act on your behalf, starting with the simplest thing, being able to surf the web, being able to do things, click, download, do things like that, but then more and more complex stuff. I would say that the way in which I think AI agents, if built well, could have pretty seismic effects on the economy as a whole is that big fractions of the economy in the United States depend on what I would call customer confusion. I mean, it's just a fact. Like huge parts. From things as big as mortgages to things as everyday as what cable company should you be in. Customer confusion is a very clear-cut strategy involving you present stuff in a way that to the person looks one way, et cetera, et cetera. I think depending on how AI agents shake out, we could see a shift in the balance of power because at some level, the AI agent can read the thing for you. And as you said with the insurance agents now, you can have this thing explained to me. Yeah, I've looked at all these. Don't worry about this. There's a late fee on this one. There's a whatever on this one. I'm giving the most optimistic version, but the point is that I think I'm just emphasizing that the economy as a whole has relied a lot on a sort of friction at that transaction stage. And I think those frictions are about to change, hopefully for the better, but you never know what these things end up doing.
So if the incentives are there to create them, right? Yeah. So I think we keep coming back to that there are incredible potentials for applications. And I think then, look, even for your inequality question, I think we as a society know how to deal with inequality. The question is there the political will to implement those solutions, right? So that's really the question. And that's a question then for the public at large and how decisions get made, political decisions get made.
We don't have a lot of time. There's so many good questions. By the way, the skyscrapers in Dubai, just FYI.
I was just messing around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to make sure that you got the answer
Netherlands is not in
to that.
Netherlands is not in Germany? Why does it sound like a German name? I don't. Anyway.
Oh my goodness! All right. So this is also a very popular one. What happens to our cognitive skills when we consciously stop challenging ourselves? There's a lot of
I think
murmuring in the room.
I think this is, amongst the big hidden risks, I think this is a massive risk. It's the things that worry me most about automation is that people forget how malleable the human mind is. We've already had this once with smartphones and ever-present technologies, at least speaking for myself. It's a real, much harder effort to focus today than it ever was. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean even if the phone is out of the way, it's just my muscles of focus have really changed. And so I think we are conducting massive neurological experiments on ourselves at scale that I don't think anybody realizes that we're doing, and I don't think anybody's tracking, and it's not intentional.
It's not an experiment. There's no control group.
Yeah, there you go. There's no control. No, we've learned there's 2%. Okay. I don't know. Admittedly, a small control group, but still.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on. We've got another one here. There's a lot. There's a lot of interest and concern about inequality. We've also got financial. So if AI will give advanced, superior financial advice, shouldn't it make everyone that uses it ultra wealthy? Or will there be guardrails to prevent that?
Who's against everyone being ultra wealthy? What do you mean? You doing guardrails against everyone being ultra wealthy?
I think maybe they're thinking guardrails like to keep you out of the ultra wealthy category. I think that's more the meaning there. So
I started talking. Okay,
yes.
I guess I'll take this one. No, I mean, to the extent that it democratizes access to information, like the example Sendhil gave earlier, and not only access to information, but how to use that information in an effective way, I think this is in general going to be good, right? I mean, and especially, I don't know about that it'll make everyone ultra wealthy, but I do think in terms of preventing some of the big mistakes that individual consumers, I've advocated for 20 years that I'm American, so but like in high schools in America, that basic the principles, the basic principles of the simplest finance should be taught in high school, right? I mean, like,
Yes.
what's a mortgage, right? Or what, you know,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so to the extent that, you know, these tools can make that information readily accessible, and even, you know, you can feed it a mortgage, like you can literally input a mortgage contract. Is this good for me or not, right? I mean, that's actually quite innovative. So I think it's rather more, a little bit like your example with the call center employees, bringing up the people who might otherwise be exploited than necessarily superpowering everyone in the upper tail, would be my guess. But
Can I say something about the inequality, since that keeps coming up?
Yeah.
There's sort of been quite a few studies now that have studied the effect of largely generative AI in a variety of workforce contexts. And I've been surprised at how they've all shown roughly the same thing, irrespective of cost. They've all shown that it has been an inequality reducer, because the kind of things it can do is to kind of lift up the less productive employees and equalize. And so I think that's worth, no doubt there will be inequality induced by the fact that sectors are going to change, people are going to have to move between this stuff, type of, that, but it is worth noting this technology at its heart, all the studies so far seem to suggest, roughly speaking, it is an inequality reducer. And that at least kind of offsets some of the fears we should have, not all.
Okay.
no, a really short one, just
Yes,
a
short
fun
one.
one. No. So I work at a German company where English is the language
The
of the
official
company,
language.
the official language of the company. ChatGPT has totally. I mean, I'm a native English speaker. Huge advantage,
Yeah.
right? In meetings and in documents.
In
and in person. But especially for documents, ChatGPT is a super leveler. So, and my wife is Austrian, right? So she's constantly using it just to reshape an email, summarize her text. So, I mean, really, you talk about in an inequality reducer. I think for translation, it's absolutely fabulous. So.
Okay, well, good. Well,
was
anyway,
short.
both of those comments are great lead-ins to the next section of the event and our next panel. So thank you very much,
Yeah, it was
all
super
of you,
fun.
for being here, for your insights. It was really good. Really, really good.
Well done.
There you go. So we are now going to have our coffee break as promised. We will reconvene here in approximately 30 minutes. So at about past, we'll see you back here for the second half of our program. Thank you. welcome back, everybody in the room, and of course to all of you joining us online. It's now time to continue with our program here at the UBS Economic Center. I'd like to start now. We mentioned before that the second half of the evening, we're going to be really taking a deep dive into AI and its effects on the labor market. So before I introduce the speaker who's going to be kicking that topic off for us, I want to hear again a bit what you were thinking. So yes, it's Mentimeter time. Open that up really quick and answer this next question for us. What's your primary concern about AI? I'm going to give you just a few minutes to, actually I'm going to give you more than a few minutes. We're going to get back to that a bit later on in the program. So you have a minute to think about that and really, zero in on what that concern could be. All right, so then now to help us set the stage for this second half of our program, I'd like to invite our next keynote speaker of the evening. He's a leading voice in the global conversation on labor markets and economic change. As the UBS Foundation Professor of Globalization and Labor Markets at the University of Zurich, he has dedicated his career to exploring how globalization and technological innovation shape our economies, our labor markets, and our societies. He also leads the university's interdisciplinary research program on equality of opportunity, furthering our understanding of the economic forces that drive inequality. He is one of the 100 most highly cited economists of the past decade and has been recognized with the very prestigious Hermann Heinrich Gossen Prize for his exceptional contributions to the field. His research spans labor economies, international trade, macroeconomics, and political economy, making him uniquely positioned to address the challenges of our rapidly evolving global economy. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to David Dorn.
Thank you. We heard in the first session that artificial intelligence provides a potentially enormous change to our economy, maybe even to the extent that we have a hype, as some people said. But there is really a lot of reason to think that a big thing is going on. One way to show that is, as has been mentioned before, there is an enormously rapid adoption of that technology. Here's one survey on this from the United States, where people earlier this year were asked whether they have already used generative AI. So that's only a subset of the AI technology overall. And just 2 years after that technology has been released to the mass market by ChatGPT, already 40% of adult Americans report having used that technology. That is a lot faster than the adoption, for instance, of the internet in the 1990s, where it took 5 years until 40% of people had used it, or the personal computer in the 1980s, where it took more than a decade to reach such a high user rate. Now, as we've heard out of the questions that were discussed in the first panel, one of the big concerns that many people have with AI is about its impacts on the labor market. And I will try to address 3 questions related to that. One, maybe the elephant in the room, whether it will cause big unemployment, but then I also ask, well, to what extent is what AI does similar or not similar to what computers have done before to the labor market? To what extent can we learn from that? And to what extent should we now think that the impacts will be different from before? So starting with the first, there is quite a lot of reason that people might be worried, because when you read the newspaper, then you find stories about an impending AI apocalypse in labor markets. You find that Elon Musk says AI will take all our jobs. And so then perhaps it's not surprising to see that a majority of people, of employees, says that they're really worried about job losses because of AI. Now, one thing we can say is also given that this mass market release of some of these technologies have been relatively recent, we don't yet see massive impacts on labor markets. But here I feel we can even make a stronger prediction about what will happen at somewhat longer horizons, because the basic concept of potentially automating labor, that's not a new thing. The way that AI might automate labor might be different from previous technologies, but we had many decades and even centuries of machines coming in, robots coming in, computers coming in, and so forth. And when we look back, we see that people have time and again worried about technology-driven unemployment. Not far from here in the city of Uster, there was a big riot about 200 years ago when workers burned down a textile factory because they tried to prevent the introduction of modern textile machinery that used a lot less workers. More recently, the second picture that you see here is a title page from the Spiegel magazine that I actually saw for the first time in the Museum of German History in Bonn. So it's by now already something that makes the History Museum. And it shows us that in the 1970s already, there was a worry that the computer revolution creates unemployment. With that magazine claiming that by the year 2000, 50% of people in Western countries would be unemployed. When we instead look at the actual employment numbers, here for the case of the United States, then we see the number of people who hold jobs has consistently been trending upwards, which we see on the left, with some dips in recessions. But also when we just ask what fraction of people between the ages of 25 and 54 holds a job, then we see over time, for a while, this has been trending up as more women enter the labor force, and since about the 1980s, it's relatively stable, fluctuating between somewhere like 75 to 80%. So definitely, we don't really see any evidence that automation that has been going on for a long time leads to a continuous decline in jobs. Now, why is it the case that automation doesn't drive up unemployment in the long run? I think there are three reasons for that, and arguably out of these three, only the first one is a very intuitive one. Namely, the first one is when we have new technology, then new technology brings the need for new types of jobs. Clearly, when we have new technology, we need people to develop that technology, we need people to adopt these technologies in firms, we need people to use it. And as one example of that, we see in the US population census that every decade the census lists new occupations, meaning that for the first time ever, a sizable number of people in the US claims to do that occupation. And these include, for instance, in 1970, the computer application engineer. Already in 2000, the artificial intelligence specialist, or more recently, the cybersecurity analyst. Clearly, these new occupations came about because we have computer technology that creates demand for these new types of jobs. The second explanation why automation does not just generate huge unemployment is that rising demand, demand can increase for jobs that are complemented by technology. Take an example, for instance, of a recent study that finds that a big company introduced AI tools in its research department and now was able to increase patent filings by 40%. Now you could say, this company in principle could say, we could just now reduce the number of researchers and then we would still have the same amount of innovation output that we had before. But most likely, the company will think differently. It will say, now actually every single researcher produces a lot more innovation than was there before. And so it's actually attractive to hire more researchers because you want to have more innovation in the company. And that means in many settings, when workers become more productive thanks to technology, then there might actually be a favorable development for these workers. The third reason is perhaps the most abstract, why we see continuously demand for human workers. And this is when we are producing technological progress in the economy, then it means that out of our inputs into the economy, we can generate more outputs. This means we add more value, we generate more income for the aggregate economy. And when people have more income, something that we've seen going up slowly over time, then people suddenly can spend more on types of goods and services that they didn't consume before or in much lower quantity. And perhaps related to that, we see jobs coming up like the amusement park worker or the sommelier, where over time people no longer just need to spend all their money on food and lodging and clothes, but they can now spend, for instance, on many leisure activities that weren't there before, and by increasing that spending, we create more jobs. So this all says, as you hear, that I'm not that worried about a big increase in long-term unemployment. But that at the same time does not mean that technology does not change how the labor market looks like. For more standard computer technology, so personal computers, robots, computer-guided machines, we already have assembled quite a lot of research insights on how they affected the labor market in broad patterns. A key idea there, developed about 20 years ago, was that computers classically had these features that they were run by software, so they needed a programmer that tells the machine exactly what to do at what step of a work process. That led to a situation where these machines were good at doing types of tasks that have a so-called routine, a so-called computer routine that follows a well-specified plan. That includes information processing of many different sorts, calculations, or steering machines in repetitive production steps. All of that are things that traditional computer technology and associated robot technology was very good at. Other things in the past were hard for computers. When it comes to problem solving, creative work, leadership, that often meant addressing completely new situations that no one pre-programmed in a machine, but also certain types of skills that most people have that are not really hard to get, like simple social interaction with human beings, visual recognition, fine motoric movements like carefully grabbing a glass. Those things turned out to be quite hard for machines, precisely because also there one needs adaptability to environmental stimuli that are not so easy to pre-program. It turned out that these types of jobs that had these routine features that could be potentially automated were located somewhere towards the middle of the labor market. In this chart, occupations are ordered from the least paid occupation on the left to the highest paid occupation on the right. And what you see is among the lowest paid occupations, we had jobs like restaurant workers, cleaners, or hairdressers whose jobs couldn't easily be automated. The automatable jobs in the factory or in the office were in the middle of the distribution, and then on top we had many skilled jobs like scientists, managers, lawyers, medical doctors that again were hard to automate. Consistent with that concept, one saw over time that the employment structure in the labor market changed with an expanding employment share in the lowest paid occupations and in the highest paid occupations, and a decline in the middle. A picture that here is taken from the United States, but that we also saw in Western Europe and in Switzerland. Now, moving on to AI, researchers said we have sort of a understanding that this old paradigm of computer technology really hit sort of the middle of the labor market, or perhaps the lower middle. So let's try to do the same type of picture for AI exposure. And this is on the right side, the result. With different measures that characterize occupational exposure to AI, you see that certainly people think that there is now more exposure in relatively high-paid occupations on the right of this chart. But there are two important caveats to this picture. The first is you see that the three curves actually do differ quite a bit, meaning that different groups of experts somewhat disagree on which occupations will really be most exposed to AI. We simply cannot yet predict that in a very clear way. The second issue is that it's actually not clear whether exposure to AI means these jobs will all be automated, or actually whether it means that these jobs will be augmented, that people in these jobs will become more productive because AI tools are helpful to them and make them more productive. Now, let me explain with a simple example how AI changed the logic of what the machines could be doing in simple tasks. This one is a picture from an older computer science paper where a dozen years ago people were still concerned with how can we tell a computer to recognize different objects, something that in the meantime works very well. And if you look at these objects, for a human being it's actually easy to say which of these are objects that you would put in your living room and that you would sit on. For traditional computer technology, that was very hard to figure out because you would need a programmer that writes a program that says the computer should look at the picture, and if you see something that maybe has like 4 legs and a flat part to sit on and backrest, then you should think of it as a sitting opportunity for the living room. But turns out that description is not very accurate. As soon as you look at the stool, you see it has no backrest. Then you see the table, which is kind of similar than the stool in the way it looks like, but you would not sit on it. And then you have other things like the bench or the toilet. You would sit on it, but not in the living room. Or the beanbag, it looks really weird, but you could sit on it in the living room. So it's actually a hard task. Now, AI changes this fundamental logic of how a machine can recognize these things, because we're no longer just telling the machine what the statistical model is to recognize these objects. Instead, humans label these pictures and then give the machine a large library, a so-called training library of labeled pictures, and based on that library, the machine then determines which features of these pictures make it more likely that it shows a sitting room, a living room, sitting furniture. AI thus self-computes that optimal statistical model instead of the human programmer providing it with the model. And one of the big strengths of that system is once the machine is properly trained, then it can not only recognize these pictures that we actually gave to the machine, but it can also recognize other similar pictures that it has never seen before. It can take the features of these pictures and make, hopefully, good predictions. Yet, that does not mean AI can do everything, because clearly, somewhere at the back, there isn't like a human intuition, there is a statistical model. And to get the statistical model, we need two things. First, the program has to be specifically trained to optimize some outcome. And if it hasn't been trained for a particular thing, then it can actually be difficult for the machine to just come up with it itself. The second is sometimes we don't have good training data that we could provide, and so it's difficult for the machine to learn from good examples. And let me make 2 examples for these 2 points. First example is kiwi picking. This comes from a computer sciences publication where people said, well, one amazing thing about these generative AI programs is they seem to be extremely good at solving math problems, even the kind of math problems you have in school that actually come in words. So let me give you here the math problem. Oliver picks 44 kiwis on Friday. Then he picks 58 kiwis on Saturday. On Sunday, he picks double the number of kiwis he did on Friday. But 5 of them were a bit smaller than average. How many kiwis does Oliver have? Now, one AI engine after the other tripped in this question because they all agreed that you have to subtract the 5 smaller kiwis from the Sunday total. Now, why is it that the machine makes that mistake? The researchers hypothesized that it could be because machines have been trained only with questions where every half sentence of the question contains information that you need to use for a correct solution of the question. But just by throwing in half sentence that has nothing to do with the solution, the machine is thrown off. And that means even in a situation where we think it looks like the machine is really good, maybe just changing the type of problem a little bit can already change the accuracy of the answer quite strongly. The second example I want to give also comes from the food domain, which is that one user supposedly queried an online engine asking what to do when cheese is not sticking to the pizza. And interestingly, that AI engine came up with the suggestion to add 1/8 cup of non-toxic glue to the sauce so as to glue the cheese to the pizza. Now, one thing here is it seems very creative, right? How do you come up with exactly 1/8 cup of glue? I mean, it seems awfully specific as an answer. Now, it turned out that then some people found that among the huge amount of data used to train this model is a big online message board. And on that online message board, 11 years ago, someone wrote that you should use 1/8 cup of glue to glue the cheese to your pizza. Apparently a joke, but now comes the more important takeaway. It's an example where a machine is trained on bad data and then thinks, oh, that's the right answer because someone actually gave that answer in the past. And this, of course, is a relatively harmless example, but there are many other examples where this is really a big bottleneck because we simply do not have very high quality data on which we could train a machine. Now you could say, well, shouldn't all these problems be fixed very soon? And I would say, yeah, to some extent, yes, because clearly big companies are investing a huge amount of money. They invest deploy some of the most brilliant minds of our times to these issues, and so surely we will make a lot of progress here. But I would also warn that the intuition that something which already works quite well will work perfectly in just a few years, that intuition is not always right. Because oftentimes, of course, these machines first get the relatively easier things right, and the last mile of improvement might actually be extremely hard. And one application where we see that, I think, is for self-driving cars, where we already had a decade ago all these predictions of self-driving cars will be everywhere in no time. And while it's true that they made progress continuously, the progress surely has been a lot slower than initially anticipated by many. I also think that this question on whether we'll get from sort of something that works quite well to the level of it working perfectly well is very decisive for labor market impacts, because many technologies, if it works perfectly well and you can actually do the entire job content that currently a human worker does with better quality, then we will have automation and displacement of labor. Instead, if we're in a situation where the machine does it reasonably well, but not super, then we'll more likely land in a situation where we still need humans to supervise these AI outputs and make sure that we don't put glue on the pizza. Now, to end, we can try to speculate a bit which types of workers might benefit from this use of AI. And the literature has argued that two domains that we should be thinking about in evaluating these impacts is the level of expertise that people have on doing the tasks on their current jobs, and the other is many jobs actually have many different tasks, and AI really just automates a subset of these perhaps, or augments a subset of these. And in these cases, it's important to know, are the tasks that are being affected the relatively more challenging tasks in an occupation or the relatively more simple tasks? Now, let me give some examples for that. There is a very interesting study conducted with people from a software company, customer service employees that answer via chat questions by customers. Sendhil mentioned it before the break. And what one sees in this chart is how successful the customer service employees of that company are in resolving problems of their customers per hour. On the horizontal axis, you see how long such a worker has been at the firm. On the vertical axis, how good they are in terms of successful resolutions of problems. And now you see all these curves are upward sloping. This means with experience, people get better at these jobs. They already have heard many problems that come up with the software and know how to react to it. What the company now did is it introduced an AI help that gives these workers a suggested answer in many cases, so that basically the workers see an experienced colleague would now answer this when a given question comes in. And the people who got that AI help, there are the ones in red, they had a much steeper learning curve than the ones without AI in blue. So the insight here was low expertise workers, they just very quickly learned what their more experienced peers would do. A second domain where the impacts can vary is when we ask, do we affect with AI the highly complex or the low complex tasks of an occupation? Take, for example, the task of a proofreader. This is also actually one domain where we have been using AI for a long time without actually maybe calling it this way. Because, of course, we have all these built-in helps to find our typos, to help us with poor grammar, and so on. Now, what this has done is it has led to a declining employment of proofreaders. But especially, it has reduced employment of low-skill, low-complexity proofreaders, the people who are only there to find typos. That you can do by machine. Instead, the remaining proofreaders have become much more highly skilled people, or at least they can devote their time to much more complex tasks. Namely, even when one asks ChatGPT whether we still need proofreaders, ChatGPT says yes, for critical documents or professional work, it's advisable because humans bring contextual understanding or cultural nuance that a simple chatbot might not have. But there is also the opposite example, where instead of automating or supporting the low complexity tasks in a job. We instead facilitate the high complexity tasks. One striking example, in my view, is work from that analyzes a company of private school that has private schools in Kenya that introduced a teaching system where these teachers have a tablet computer in hand. That's the thing that the lady there is holding, and the company has, by data analytics, find out a very efficient way to instruct kids. So the tablet tells the teacher in great detail what to say, where to point, which questions to ask. And as a consequence, this company now was able to hire a lot less highly qualified teachers because they don't need to have extremely detailed understanding of the teaching materials and don't have to come up with their own, teaching curriculum or something. What they have to do is to do what the tablet says and make sure that the kids behave in the classroom. And turns out that this was very successful in raising schooling attainment and schooling performance of these kids. And in a country setting where there might be a big shortage of qualified teachers and where we might undersupply people with schooling, this can actually be a significant improvement. So there are also situations where by using a computer aid and AI, we might actually make some occupations accessible for less trained people that prior could not do those. Let me conclude with 3 predictions that I take from this. The first one I'm quite confident on. Namely, first, AI will not lead to mass unemployment simply because automation never did in the long run in human history. Second, the impact of AI on the labor market will not materialize as fast or as dramatically as Elon Musk predicts. Maybe that's a bit low-hanging fruit because his predictions probably are not that great. But the broader point is, I think people often overestimate how fast labor markets change. In reality, also experience from prior technology shows things move somewhat more gradually and not AI apocalypse style. The third one is the prediction that I'm least confident on, but maybe hopeful for. Namely, I think AI has the potential to benefit less educated and less experienced workers. So this, for once, could be a technology where not just highly educated university graduates are the big beneficiaries, but it could really also lift up other segments of the labor force that so far have often suffered from technological developments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Right, there's so many things from your talk that we're gonna unpack, as we say, in the next panel session. So, the previous part of our program, we're going to be joined now by some more experts who are going to help us dive more into this topic of AI and the labor market. So, joining David, who we just met, so we'll just move on, is country director for Google Switzerland. She took on this role in 2023 after leading Google Austria for 5 years, where she made a significant impact in driving digital transformation and innovation. Before joining Google, she served as CEO of the media agency Mindshare, where she spearheaded their global digital strategies for nearly 2 decades. A graduate in media technology and design from Hagenberg University of Applied Sciences, she is also a recognized leader in the broader digital ecosystem. She has held key positions, including president of IAB Austria and secretary general of IAA Austria. Please join me in welcoming Christine Antlager-Winter. Please. All right, David and Christine are joined by associate professor at the University of Milano Bicocca, who brings a unique blend of economics, psychology, and data-driven insights, who offers a fresh perspective on human decision-making. His research has been widely published in top-tier journals such as Nature, Nature Human Behavior, and the Journal of Economic Literature. And his forthcoming book, The Economics of Language, is set to be published by Cambridge University Press. Please help me give a warm welcome to Professor Valerio Capraro. Hello, Valerio. And our final guest is a professor of applied macroeconomics, director of the Koch Swiss Institute at ETH Zurich, editor of the European Journal of Political Economy, and a member of several advisory committees in Switzerland and abroad. His research relies heavily on empirical methods and statistics, focusing on monetary economics, macroeconomics, and political economy, with a particular interest in areas closely related to practical and topical issues. Please put your hands together for Jan Egbert Sturm. All right, well, thank you all for being with us today. It's great to have you up here. So, as before, we're going to have some time for questions after the panel, so please go ahead and pop open that Mentimeter, send in your questions, or then just like the ones that are already there, et cetera, et cetera. Before your talk, David, we did ask the audience a poll question, which is what concerned them the most about AI. So we're going to start by just having a look at that and figuring out, okay, so of all of the things that were listed there, what is their most concern about? Okay, and job loss is not the biggest concern, all right? Privacy and bias is the biggest concern, 44%. Huh, am I the only one going, huh? No. What do you say?
Well,
Anybody, take it.
I already said that I agree that job loss shouldn't be our biggest concern, and so I'm clearly with the other two groups here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say David did a really good job, but it was asked before you did your speech, so.
That's true.
That was on purpose, it was on purpose. We were
But
it's
it's striking how we see these media reports that really come with these enormous claims, and I think have the potential to really make people worry. And I do think it's good to see that many folks, realize that maybe you shouldn't take this, you should take this with a grain of salt when you see these AI apocalypse scenarios.
Mm-hmm. So maybe is there potentially a hype around the AI apocalypse?
Media wants attention, right? And so if you say this will be something that has massive impacts and is super dramatic, that gives you probably more clicks than when you say it might be more of a gradual transformation and, don't worry much, tomorrow will still look similar to today.
Mm-hmm. So Jan Egbert, for example, do you see AI as being transformative or disruptive when it comes to employment?
Well, actually, probably a bit of both, right? In that particular sense, this polarization, which David just mentioned, that's what you indeed see in the media. They either pick the one side or they pick the other side, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Valerio?
So, same question, or about?
Yes.
Bias?
We're just kind of trying to get a feel for.
Okay, so now
I
wanted to say something about bias, because I completely agree that is an important issue, and I would like to add that it's also a very difficult issue to overcome, because if you try to remove bias, usually you create other biases.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so for example, we have a paper coming out where we look at gender biases in moral dilemmas, like where you are allowed to sacrifice a person for the greater good. So if you ask ChatGPT whether it is okay to abuse a woman to prevent a nuclear apocalypse, it says strongly disagree 100% of the times. You ask 50 times, and 50 times it says strongly disagree. If you ask it, is it okay to abuse a man to prevent a nuclear apocalypse? It says, yes, why not?
Okay.
So, and we argue that this comes from the fact that there is a lot of attention about gender parity, and of course this is very good, but probably the engineers have put some filters such that now it completely overruled every reasonable opinion and completely. So it creates basically the opposite bias. And then there is research showing that every time, so it's a theoretical research, that every time you try to address a bias, you create another bias. So this is really a difficult problem to address.
I'm not even begin to ask how you resolve that. I'll take that as we'll talk about that over over an apero. There we go. So actually, I want to start with focusing a bit then on productivity, right? AI-driven productivity. You know, a big selling point, of course, of Gen AI is that it is expected at least to drive significant productivity gains. So Christine, in a recent report commissioned by Google entitled The Economic Opportunity of AI in Switzerland, generative AI could boost Switzerland's GDP by 80 to 85 billion Swiss francs annually, potentially adding up to 11% in peak years. Where or how do you see these gains playing out? And how is Google helping businesses and public institutions harness this potential?
Yeah. So we let Implement Consulting conduct this study, right? We launched it end of September. And just the resonance that this results, and I think also the fact that there was data there that kind of put out an hypothesis on what this means for Switzerland and in which position Switzerland is, I think showed how important this is. Listening to what you just presented to us, there is a high correlation, and I think we've been hearing that different kind of approaches actually lead to very similar results. I think the GDP potential for Switzerland was not out there yet, so there it is. There is also the sub-message, if we do not adopt this fast enough, then the GDP potential might decrease to 3%. I mean, it's some calculations that are done based on economic data of Switzerland and based on different approaches by other research institutions. But I think just adding data and facts and like potential scenarios to the whole discussion is for me an overall theme that's very helpful. If I read the results here, I could also tell that this is a very informed audience when it comes to economics, right? I mean, we can see that, so that's for sure also visible. But we also did a deep dive in what this would mean for the Swiss labor market, and the numbers that we put behind that, I think they very much fit to what we heard before, is really that the productivity gains are a lot of small gains, so that comes more to the transformative nature of generative AI. Sorry, I had to say that this study is about the impact of generative AI, not about the impact of AI overall, which
yes,
is
generative AI.
somehow connected, but still it's, and then it's like something else. And so that it's a lot of small gains, right? So this study is really like going very deep, very granular in all the different job roles and profiles that you had in all the different industries of a country, and then takes into account what are these like incremental productivity gains. And if you do all of that, the results of this kind of approach was that in Switzerland, 66% of the jobs get augmented, back to your kind of hypothesis that if jobs are somehow impacted by Gen AI, what does this mean? Are they like augmented or are they going to change, right? So they might be augmented and just create more productivity, create more space for creativity, for focusing on the actual business goal. 26% might have a very low exposure to Gen AI because it's very manual work is involved, or like caretaking work. And 8% would be highly exposed. Think about call centers, think about a lot of administrative work. I'm not an economist. If I talk to economists, they're not so worried about the 8% because it seems that in Switzerland, I heard the number that 10% of the jobs are in constant transformation. So that's kind of what we also in this study have found out.
Jan Egbert, what do you think about that 8%? I mean, the Koff Institute, you do economic forecasting.
Yes, we do economic forecasting, which actually implies we have a bias into the past, right? Because that's what forecasters do. We extrapolate what we know from the past into the future. That's our business. And if we look at the past and we realize what happened with computers and other kinds of software and all these kind of things, then it's, for me as a forecaster, difficult to imagine that it will really give a huge boost as compared to what we've seen the last 2-3 decades. Last 2-3 decades, if we take Swiss data, Switzerland has a potential growth rate, as we economists call it, of something like 1.8%, that order of magnitude. 0.7 percent points are growth of the number of people working. Another 0.7% is multi-factor productivity growth, and that's what we're talking about, essentially. And then we have 0.4%, which is roughly that the capital stock gets more, simply more machines, so normal investment activities. So we're talking about whether this 0.7%, which has been in Switzerland relatively stable over 2 to 3 decades, whether that will now fundamentally change and suddenly be more than double of that. As a forecaster, I said, I find that a bit difficult. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think, yes, from the micro level, it will have all kinds of consequences. We will see sectoral change, sectoral shifts, and it will hopefully help at least to also deal with the demographics which we are confronted with, because we can't expect that the population will continue to grow, at least the working age population will continue to grow the same way as it did the last couple of decades. So that is actually a challenge. Mm-hmm. So maybe this helps from a Swiss perspective, but I find it difficult to say, let's simply assume that we have a 1 percentage point additional growth per year, which is basically what the study is saying.
Okay. So what you touched on the sectors, on some of the sectors that would be seeing AI growth. I know you also do in the study, because not all industries, of course, will be affected equally, right? We've seen this. It is how I know that the study refers to, I think you just mentioned 80% of potential economic impact from AI, manufacturing, other sectors, service, the service industry, et cetera. How do you plan to support the Swiss service industries like finance, healthcare? What strategies are out there to support these sectors that will benefit?
Yeah, I think it's not like the one strategy, right? I mean, the tools are widely available. That's also a reason, and coming back to what we heard, right, is that you might come to an hypothesis saying, well, it's at least something that doesn't require tech skills, right? You can prompt with like natural language. You don't need to learn. I think it was totally useless that I did like study software engineering. Don't need it anymore. And the tools are widely available, right? It's not like anyhow restricted. You don't need vast like data sources for that. So it's really something every company can use, every individual can use, and still it will need upscaling, of course, right? We all know that. And I think that is where it's not just the one strategy. It's really about the wide range of different offerings. But just to give some examples that are very relevant to Switzerland, given that we have a large pharmaceutical sector here. And for example, one thing that came out of Google DeepMind, and some of you might know, there was just a Nobel Prize appointed to the team of Google DeepMind for the AlphaFold technology or progress that they did, where they were able, with the use of AI, get 3D structures for all the known 200 million proteins, where before that it took one PhD to get the 3D structure for one protein, right? Mm-hmm. So that kind of revolutionized how we can go into drug discovery and how companies can use that, and for sure just brings much more focus and power into the applied sciences way of how can we make things better.
Hmm. What about, you mentioned that the health sector, Valerio, certain sectors, so again, like healthcare, finance, expected to benefit. So in your mind, what are some of the ethical concerns you foresee with AI's role in these industries?
Well, there are many privacy. For example, if we think about healthcare, of course, to maximize the capability of AI to give good advice, it has to be have access to very personal information about health. So, and this could be used by malicious actors. So privacy for sure, and what else? But also coming back to what I was saying before, moral dilemmas, because in healthcare there are a lot of situations in which one has to take a decision between two beds. So the literature about moral dilemmas is very well studied in healthcare for this reason, and to understand how, so whether there are biases in artificial intelligence systems that could have an effect on the advices that it gives, but also, of course, biases in the training system. Although there is some literature showing that they might actually decrease. Because, for example, so let's talk also about positive sides, not only about negative sides, because there are also some biases that could be reduced. Like, for example, there is evidence that when a patient interacts with a doctor, a mismatch in race could have a negative effect on the interaction. And of course, the mismatch in race is much likely to be in the direction where the doctor is white and the patient is black, other than the way around, which is less common. But if the doctor is an artificial intelligence system, it doesn't know your race, doesn't see your face, so it could overcome this potential bias. And there is some evidence that it is actually true.
If we come back now to, you're positive about the fact that, we're not going to all lose our jobs to very, very positive, actually, to machines. I just wondered, is it that are we underestimating people's ability to find more work?
Well, the problem is that it's very easy to know what kind of occupations we currently have. So then we can ask that next question that many people did, which is, which of these occupations could we possibly automate? But at the same time, it's a lot harder to think about occupations that don't exist yet, right? If you would go back, 50 years in time, and you would say, "Do you think there will be a cybersecurity analyst?" Then people would say, "What are you talking about?" Right? So there are just many of these things. Even when you sort of read like science fiction novels, it often feels to me like they take their current day technology and then sort of say, hey, instead of like the car drives on the street, well, now it can fly also, right? But it's sort of like maybe not that much out of the box thinking, right? It's just like a recombination of things we already know. But things like the internet, right? No science fiction writer probably in the 1950s said we have the internet at some point. And so that means it's just hard for us to think in advance of what these jobs could be.
I also think, I'm not sure I think it was the last panel we touched on managers, are people in management positions. Are those jobs going to be, I don't know. I mean, managers, you're the managers. I am the non-expert here. But, it's about optimization, it's about productivity, and it's about if you have all of these things that can take over these jobs for you.
But when you actually look at what managers do in day-to-day work, then you actually see they do many different tasks, right? It's not like they're sitting in a computer and click a button there all the time. They go to meetings, they talk to people, they hire people, they communicate to the outside. Many, many different things in the end. You see that actually in data where people where jobs are rated according to what do they do in many different domains. Managers just have the most, because they do so many different things, right? Managers often actually, they do similar, you know.
I mean, could you
So let's give an
your
example.
job?
If you compare a manager to a secretary, oftentimes it's the case the manager also does actually similar stuff than the secretary, but additional stuff on top of that. And so this means when now such a technology comes in, clearly it can much improve some of these tasks, maybe automate others, but it's very hard to imagine that you could just automate a very, very, very wide range of tasks. And that means it's much more the type of job that will be augmented by technology. By contrast, if you think of a conveyor belt worker in a factory that is just sorting goods, that's the kind of thing where you are very narrow in your task. You do just one thing, and maybe that one thing we can automate. So these jobs are more
I
fragmented.
can come in. So first, thank you. It feels very good to have recognition for that. But one thing, just to really bring it out there, I hope really very much, and I can feel some glimpses of it where I can be more productive. Because those of you who might work in like global organizations, usually there is some sort of performance system where you do your what have you done the last quarter, or all of that. Doesn't feel very productive to me, because if I'm a good manager, I know what my team does well and does not. But in very complex organizations, you have to acknowledge that you somehow need this for more documentation kind of things. So just imagine, you take your weekly reports that you might do anyhow, you take your expectations, you take your 3 questions that you answer for performance review, you put it all into, in my case, Notebook LM. For those who haven't used it, use it, it's amazing. And then you say, answer these 3 questions based on my weekly reports and my expectations, and then you read through it, and 80% of that is absolutely correct, and 20% you just amend. And it takes you, I don't know, just a small fraction of the time that you usually sit there, and everyone's annoyed by it, I would say. Just one example, right? And this is just the extra thing that you need to do apart from everything. Yeah, so I think there's always a balance of the risks and the opportunities, but there is, I think, a lot of opportunities that if we start using this technology, it would probably also like open our mind more of what this can mean for the future, because we have to acknowledge no one knows, right? We do predictions, we do like extrapolations, but it's something that is very accessible actually to some extent, if we think about like a business area.
What's been your experience, John Egbert?
Yeah, well, I'm on this front totally with you, because I'm using it in a very similar way. Notebook LM is really amazing. Yes, and all of these tools help our daily life quite a bit. So hence, I do feel more productive. But will we actually be able to measure this additional productivity? Hopefully, yes. But I'm not that convinced, because at the same time, I also have the feeling that it creates additional administration, because it's now easier to do some things. So there will be also a bit of a counter reaction, more regulation, more administration, partly what can be automated, and I fully agree, I'm using that as well, yes, but partly it is another job on top of the already existing jobs.
To manage the...
To manage, well, dealing with all of this. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm really very much with David here, basically saying, well, don't overestimate the speed by which this is going, because there are also all kinds of obstacles along the way, additional elements which will be introduced, and regulation is one of them.
We can get into that, into regulation, but I'm also interested because, of course, if we look back now at, back at the worker of the future. Okay, no. So, as we look at the people, the younger people that are coming up into the workforce, right? And how younger generations are being raised on having these fantastic tools, right? How is that going to affect their development? If we can extrapolate for a minute, how is that going to affect future generations of managers or employees? Are they going to be on the same level? Will it level the playing field? Will it be detrimental or not?
Yeah. Well, I actually taking this up, I actually worry a little bit, but maybe others can help me solve this worry about the medium to longer run. Because how I currently see AI is that it's a very efficient RA, a research assistant. Yeah, so it's doing jobs which no longer need to be done by someone like a research assistant. I can do them myself now because I have ChatGPT, I have NodeLM, I have Perplexity, I have all of these tools at my disposal. Yes, it goes much faster. But actually, I used to be an RA as well during my career. I needed that phase in which I learned about all of these things. Yes, we will, in the future, perhaps have fewer of these types of positions because, well, generative AI can do those. I'm now the one who is judging whether the output from the ChatGPT makes sense. I'm seeing, okay, the glue on my pizza is not something I really want. Yes, I understand that. But so to speak, will the next generation, which hasn't gone through this educational steps
This is what I was trying to.
Will the next generation still be capable of that, or will they simply be, in a sense, forced to accept whatever the chat box is giving them? And are they still able to really, well, make a good judgment whether that makes sense? I mean, the glue on the pizza, I think also the next generation will figure out.
Yes.
But there are other things where it's much more difficult, right?
I guess
I guess some skills will become particularly valuable in the future. For example, critical skills. So the capacity to not take what ChatGPT gives you for granted, but double check and critically double check that. And starting from that, I think learning how to interact with these systems in a way that is enhance human AI collaboration. So that will be a skill that will be probably very important in the future. And so people that have these skills naturally will have an advantage probably. And for the others, I guess here we come to regulation because I guess here there should be a role for policymakers to try to help people that are at risk of lagging behind. Maybe with training programs, for example.
I was going to say, how do you envision that?
Training programs, I think, is the obvious answer.
Speaking
of which, I was just thinking of Google, because I know you do quite a bit of training.
I mean, generally, this discussion about education hasn't so much shifted since the broad kind of accessibility of Gen AI, because in my opinion, we discussed that critical thinking, collaboration, very human skills are something that we should try to create more space and room in our education systems, not only in Switzerland, by the way. I think it's a much larger kind of topic in at least the Western world. So that seems to be still the case. So focusing on that and just trying to introduce that, usually you have to do that on a country level because that's where education decisions are taken, seems to be still on top of the agenda, and it's not just handing tablets to children, right? That might not be the full solution. So I think that is very important. On the other thing, of course, it's a lot of upskilling, you can call it, right? So really providing of gaining these new skills, right? Even if we have we have good accessibility of these tools, but it might need some extra training. And we try to do our part, other companies try to do their part. And that's, I think, when it comes to exactly this collaboration, when we see such significant progress in technology, it's usually the time when you come together and you try to find solutions together, like politics, companies, society, right? All the different stakeholders, academia, education. It's not the easiest thing to do, as we know, and that we learned from history. But just the fact that we do this attempt, and I feel Switzerland is in a good spot with that, right? Is for sure a very important part for setting the right kind of ways.
So, in your opinion, how could you differentiate yourself, David, in the labor market?
Well, I would very much agree with what has just been said. I think it's still the case that humans have big strengths in human-to-human interaction, which machines have become a lot better, but I think there is still, a big gap in that respect. And then, of course, part of what's changing over time is we get new tools that we can use, and that again to some extent is not something entirely new, right? I mean, we had in the past like the pocket calculator, and sometimes like when I was in high school, right, at some point we could start using the pocket calculator because how often do you still need that skill where you write like two numbers with 7 digits on top of each other and then you add it up by hand, right? Probably most of us learned that in school, but these days that everyone has a pocket calculator in our cell phone that we carry, it's just no longer that needed. And so I think once you really have widespread technology available that makes something a lot easier, then maybe at some point we should also say, well, that skill now just is no longer that important. Let's think about other things that we can invest in our teaching. And so I feel at some point you also want to say, let's once we have very good technology available, let's also adjust our training to allow students to use the technology.
There's a bit of a difference with the example given. I think 2 and 2 will always be 4, right? But what ChatGPT is giving to us depends upon how it's being trained, about what's happening, and we need to judge whether that's true. So that I think is the change which we're now going through. Many of the previous technological developments, they were indeed easing many of our decisions, so to speak, and we don't have to question those. But here we actually talk about potential bias, these kind of things. Hence implying we should question those. We should not simply take whatever the machine is telling us for granted. And that's going to be the big challenge, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's absolutely true, but it also means it's just the work process becomes different, right? So instead of saying, here is this 100-page document and now you have to do the 2-page summary, you can say, well, let's start with a suggestion that comes out of a program and then read through it and evaluate. So I do think we do have changes where it will just become more widespread to integrate such tools into our process. And then, of course, that you're still always responsible for providing good results, right? When I typed the wrong numbers in my pocket calculator, I also didn't get the right result.
Yes. Yeah, it will still be wrong.
Yes, still be wrong then.
Yes. So I can imagine, in terms of young, we probably have some young people here in the audience, students, the University of Zurich is just here. I mean, what could they do to differentiate themselves relative to AI? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there, but is it going to be Gen AI? Is it going to be something that you can put on your CV? I'm a Gen AI expert. I'm being serious, like that really how to manage all of these different. Is this going to be that kind of skill?
Sure, why not? I mean, I already see it with my research assistants, right? I mean, they are
you
just
look for somebody that can manage.
No, I mean, I just see, you don't even have to look for it all that hard. They're just like the younger generations, they're much better with these things on average, is my experience, right? And so like telling someone, here we could do actually a prediction model with machine learning to get that, to improve that data. That is now something that's very accessible, right, for research assistants. And so many people now, of course, also start listing that on their CV, and these just become skills that are valued.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the cases. I mean, there is, and I'm sure many of you know, right? There is a lot of cases where individual people in a work environment or a research environment, they have to deal with so much information that's out there that's just not processable as a human being, right? If you take all your papers in your expert area, you probably won't be able to read them. And if you kind of go like creatively about that and like, oh, I can use this tool for that is probably the differentiation that you would like to see from the people that apply, and the critical thinking behind it, right? And the openness and the transparency around it. I think that's right now probably those things that really make the difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I keep coming back to something else you said in your presentation, David, about how, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of information in the last couple of hours, but you know how lower skilled workers will have an opportunity to, let's say, bump up or be able to raise their perspectives. Could that have a detrimental effect, maybe the opposite, on people's thinking, well, why am I going to go to university for 4 years if it's going to be like this?
Well, I mean, that's of course also up to the universities whether they are able to, keep up with the change in time and make sure that they still teach something which is relevant to people. So, even in the example that Jan Eckbert gave, right, of like these like entry-level academic jobs, which maybe you don't really need these people anymore, there is of course the possibility that just the entry-level job is now one level higher, right? And because the other thing is so easy, you no longer need to put actually very highly trained people into relatively unsophisticated tasks, but you can deploy them to something more challenging. And so that's precisely this kind of upskilling where there is some potential.
I can buy that. Seriously. I want to wrap it up now with a quick look at Switzerland specifically. So, Jan Eckbert, from a long-term macro perspective, how do you see AI adoption influencing Switzerland's economic competitiveness on the global stage?
I think we economists agree upon that. Switzerland is very well positioned, at least relative to all the other countries, because we already have a flexible economy. The labor market is flexible. The small, medium enterprises have shown over the last decades that they can easily adjust or relatively easily adjust to new situations. Yes, we have a high level of human capital, as we economists call it. So all of that are really helpful in adapting new technologies. So in that particular sense, I agree. I think we would all agree upon that if you would pick a country on the globe, then Switzerland belongs to one of those countries who really should be front leader here, or should be really taking benefit of that particular situation.
Christine.
Yeah, I think you said it, right? I mean, we see the numbers. I think we all agree, just the academic landscape, the research, that I feel is also very closely connected to how can we create good economic progress in the country, and beyond that, obviously, because Switzerland in the end is a small country, right? So Switzerland's economy is very globally oriented and very successfully. Gives like a really good basis, right? Also, I think generally, and we see ourselves part of that. We're now 20 years in Zurich, right? We have 5,000 people here in Zurich from Google. The tech ecosystem that kind of developed very, very vividly over the past years is something that you can really build upon. So I think it's a really good basis. I think what really is now important, like in other countries as well, but on this good basis, it's like collaboration, come together. How do we define the regulatory landscape, obviously, which is not the easiest task. We all agree, I think, that we need regulation. That's also what we say. It's like we need to be bold and responsible, right? So we need to create the space for innovation, which goes into the bold part. But a lot of responsibility has to be there. But we've heard that also before today. That's pretty obvious, right? But how is Switzerland going about that, right? We're operating in a global kind of environment. There is the European Union. They take a very specific stand. So I think the most important part is probably not to think that we can do it a little bit better and we add some little delta and like Swiss finish, as they call it. That might not be so helpful, but figuring that out will need collaboration, will need the experts coming together, and a good openness from politics as well, which I see there is a good basis for that.
Okay, David.
Well, I also think that Switzerland has a great potential, given that there is a lot of knowledge economy here that has a potential to gain from easier access to expertise, or also just like, of course, a knowledge economy that already produced a lot of data that even opens up the potential to reanalyze data and get out new results. So for instance, in pharmaceuticals, a big topic is whether you can go through old results of drug tests and reanalyze them and maybe find that some drugs, without even you noticing, had some positive side effects, right, and could be used for another use. That, of course, would be very attractive if one finds such things without actually having then to invest into developing an entire new type of medication.
Now, Valerio, I'm going to ask you to represent the rest of the world. Outside of Switzerland, the whole rest of the world. No, so if you had to give one piece of advice to policymakers, businesses, educational institutions on preparing for the future of AI, the future of work in an AI-driven economy, what would that be?
Okay, so in our paper on generative AI and its impact on society, we describe this impact as an earthquake, in the sense that it's very difficult to make exact predictions, but the socioeconomic landscape is going to change significantly. And it's the role of policy to try to avoid the harm as much as possible. And we analyzed the approach from the USA, the EU, and the UK, and we found that basically there is very little attention to this issue of socioeconomic inequalities. So my piece of advice is just to, first of all, to think about this and start trying to find some solutions that could be training programs, could be to try to shift the incentives towards human AI complementarity instead of automation. And so I think these are two starting points.
Okay, it's interesting you say that because there's a lot of interest in the room about inequality, right? And there is, in fact, a lot of interest on bias. And there's also a lot of interest, according to our Mentimeter question. We're going to open up the room now to questions. So if there's anybody in the room, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll bring you the mic. But there was a lot of interest in whether or not money in education, why bother investing time and money in education if AI can propel us to the same levels, without doing the work. But we talked about that already. Where's our gentleman? Go ahead.
Andre Brandley, LMU Munich. I would like to address a question to a point that David Dorn addressed with regard to the quality of data that AI is addressing. I think this is a very important question. We also mentioned drug discovery several times now. I think the expectations are far too high, and I will illustrate this with an example. IBM had the Watson project almost 14 years ago, where the idea was to mine the scientific data to improve drug discovery. It was a lot of hype. The whole project failed abysmally because the scientific literature has a lot of errors in there. So how do you solve this problem? IBM sold the whole project, closed it in 2021. Is there a way to solve this problem of properly annotating the data out there that you can actually mine it in a meaningful manner?
Yes, it's a very, very difficult problem. I mean, because especially in those cases where we would be most keen to have a computer make a diagnosis, namely in a case where someone has sort of unclearly defined symptoms and some headache and chest pain and whatever things. It could be many different things, and then it's just very hard for doctors to make the right diagnosis. And oftentimes, if you take data from a hospital, well, a lot of the diagnosis that they actually did, well, might not have been true, but what's more is it was never actually proven or disproven that the diagnosis was right or wrong. And using then that type of data is very hard. There are other types of data, if you take like data from drug trials, there you have the advantage that you have a two well-defined groups, if it's done well, where they differ mostly by one group got a drug, the other didn't. And the other thing is there, you have kind of, to get the drug even approved, you need to have very high quality measurements of specific outcomes. So that usually means you would hope that there is a more standardized way to really check whether certain health outcomes have changed for people. But overall, it remains a big problem, and it remains a big problem going back also to the labor market, right? In these questions of, for instance, whom should we recruit or so, it would be oftentimes very attractive, especially if you have the type of job ads where hundreds and hundreds of people apply. It would be attractive to take a lot of work off your shoulders by just having the machine sort out everything. But then again, you need to have ex ante a very trustworthy database that really says which people in the past have been good workers, and especially if that type of database has a lot of biases in it, because in the past you discriminated against certain groups, then you can, of course, just perpetuate problems. And one striking example I actually saw a little while ago at an event at MIT is researchers asked a generative AI engine what to do with a person who is very agitated and angry and shouts around. And then when that person was a white person, they said, well, this person should probably be sent to a hospital, and they should check whether there is a mental health problem. If it was a black person, they said they should be sent to a prison because, they misbehave. And so you see that, in a way, I liked a lot the example that Sendhil gave in the first session of saying, we just show to the judges what kind of biases they might have, right? That I thought was a very clever approach. In other cases, we instead have this issue that when we just try to learn from humans, we really need to make sure that we learn from the good behavior and the correct decisions of humans and not the bad ones.
Maybe coming shortly back to the health example that you gave, I think two things. One is we tend to still fall into the trap of some progress, we think everything is resolved, and then, oh my God, it's not. So this, we overestimate the first year, we underestimate on the long run. But on the very specific health example, like, yes, we were not building this on a perfect world, but what could come out, and you kind of touched upon it, right, is like you might be able to build new hypotheses that you then test with probably like tests that we always did. Like you go to a laboratory, you see how does it really act on a human. It's not like you have this new you have this technological progress and now the pill comes out of it, right? It's like there is still a very long part of responsibly making sure that this advantages really bring the result that we want to have. But you might speed up somewhere in phases before that. And I'm just wanted to really shed some light on it because that's easily, I think, still the excitement of the progress leads to, well, but is this then really being there in a second? And if you talk to Google DeepMind people, they're like, well, there is now a lot of work actually, and that will take time, right, until drug discovery will then build on the basis of this progress that has been made, new hypotheses, new drugs, new research projects.
Gentleman in the front.
So Ernst Fair. So what I'm going to say now is not my idea, but I had the privilege of having lunch with Sendhil, Mullainathan, our first speaker, and he convinced me about something that is, I think, worthwhile to spell out. And it is the huge opportunity that exists to create a marriage between AI and behavioral economics. So over the last 2 or 3 decades, we learned a lot about how humans make mistakes, and that these mistakes are not just random, they are systematic. And we know, so to speak, in many domains, risk-taking, decision-making of judges, decision-making of doctors, and so on, a lot how these mistakes are made and what the characteristics of these mistakes are. So now if you train an AI on the past decisions of humans, you basically incorporate the mistakes, the systematic mistakes of the humans into the AI. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to marry the insights from behavioral economics with the use of AI. And I think there's a huge unexploited opportunity here that is not yet kind of reaped, where we can make progress along these lines. And I just wanted to point that out. Also because at the University of Zurich, we have very good people who do AI. Also, there's Elliot Ash, also here from ETH. And we have a huge behavioral economics group who has a lot of expertise in doing this. So there are opportunities here in really making progress that is that shapes the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else in the room? We have a hand up back there. Gentleman in the back row, yeah.
Thank you. Tom Robinson, APFL. I've got a question about the part of the labor market that hasn't been discussed today, and that's unpaid labor. Most of it happens in the home, in the families. Our economy doesn't function unless it happens, right? So, how about that? What is your take on Gen AI, how that could disrupt unpaid labor?
Well, I mean, you told
Don't
me
look at
before
me.
that you use AI for cooking recipes, right? So that's
yes.
what comes spontaneously to my mind. But more generally, I mean, these are is a segment of work that oftentimes actually also has an equivalent in a paid labor market. We also have people getting paid for looking after kids, cooking, cleaning, many of the tasks that people do in the household. My sense is that so far this is an area of the labor market that is less talked about when we think about AI, and that of course also to some extent brings a certain risk of leaving these people behind. That being said, I agree very much with the speakers on the first panel. It's a matter also of what one invests in developing in technology development. One thing especially, I think, where one has a lot of potential now with the language-based models is that you can have people, talk to the machine and then get having sort of a much easier entry point to get advice. So that is not only for the sophisticated people in home production, but in the labor market often for the relatively untrained people who do cleaning jobs or otherwise jobs who might not have so much ease to interact with machines, with the written word. That might be an advantage for getting them access to things that can help them.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about our study, I mean, absolutely spot on. I think it's generally a societal issue that we have, that we do not take enough attention on the unpaid work. We also haven't found really the solution on the societal and therefore also economical change. You showed the numbers with women coming to the labor market and the same access level for education. And we still try to solve this for the women, which is, I think, ultimately the wrong way of doing it, because we have to solve it for the society, and children have, in most of the cases, not just the mother, but sometimes also a father or other kind of family constellations. But if I think about the study, right, I mean, there might be parts, but for sure more in the paid part, because that's usually what's in the economic numbers, about like work that is usually care work, right, or more like work manual work, right? So you have parts of that in there. They might be in the bucket of being like less affected by Gen AI, but I could just say +1, as you say, right? I think we should have more attention on that because we heavily rely on this work.
All right, so we are almost out of time tonight, but we have one other very popular question tonight, which we'll close with, which is, new AI applications often surprise us with cool, unexpected, emergent behaviors, encouraging us to drive its development further. Will the last surprise AI has for us be good or bad? Put on that forecasting hat.
Easy answers are a difficult thing.
That's the problem, right? I think I'm a notorious optimist, so I presume it will be good, but we never know. That's right.
What do you say, Valerio?
So I think something that we have not told in another session is that I think people have a natural and innate tendency to push limits. So I think they will use AI to just be more creative and create new stuff that will be liked by other people, and this could create a completely new markets that maybe we cannot imagine now, but it will come. So just to conclude with a note of optimism.
Yeah, also an optimist. Okay, Christine?
I think such a question is like, you should not answer it with a yes or a no or a good or bad, because that is ultimately not how we should approach the whole topic. But I think the most important thing is, I think, that we have a balanced approach on opportunities and risks, right? We have to take both really serious. If we over-index on one of the things and then like don't work on the other, I think that's exactly what we should avoid doing.
All right, David, last word.
Well, if there really is a last step of development, I would tend to fear that it had to be a very bad step that then made things stop. So I would rather hope we actually don't have a last step and see a continuous development that will go on.
All right. I'll take that optimism as well. Thank you very much, all of you, for your insights and your time. All right. To all of those who joined us virtually, thank you so much for being out there. And this is where we say goodbye. So have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we hope that you'll join us at future events at UBS Center. We are getting there. Yeah, we're getting there. I'm just saying goodbye to the people that aren't in the room, because the rest of you in the room still have the research slam that's going to be taking place in the foyer in just a few minutes. We're going to give you a few minutes to just head on out there. Valerio is going to be taking part as well, presenting some of his research. So be sure to stick around for that, and we'll see you in just a few minutes. Thank you so much.